Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another wonderful tasting with the Virtual Tasting Society. Today, we're excited to welcome Leopold Brothers, the people who brought back the three-chamber distillery, this distill, three-chamber still. God, I should probably edit that out later, but we have our days. I have been enjoying a cocktail with your lime cordial, so that I blame you for this.
Oh, good.
Todd, thank you so much for joining us. It's an interesting last name. Are you related to the Leopold brothers at all?
Believe it or not, we have people asking us all the time if we're a mob front or something like that. They're always shocked when it's a real thing. Actually, funny thing, we started as a brewery in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and the night before, this is our business plan. We put it together in 1994, and before we had a meeting with our first prospective investor, we received a letter in the mail from the Arbor Brewing Company that it's opened up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, with a cease and desist. So we had about 10 minutes to change over. We went to a Kinko's to change our name, and we figured, Leopold Brothers, who the hell wants to use that last name? And so it was entirely by accident, but it's myself and my older brother Scott, and we started doing business in 1999, started as a brewery. I'm a German trained brewer. Went to German brewing school many, many moons ago, did my apprentice work, and opened up shop in Ann Arbor, Michigan, making wildly popular, and I say that obviously as a joke, unfiltered German style lagers, which I think actually became cool about last year. But the result of how well it went over with everybody, it led us into distillation within a year afterwards, so that we would have something to sell that people actually wanted to drink. We had a very intense and loyal fan base. The problem was it was about 5 people. A slight exaggeration, but
An
um,
unfiltered German lager. Is that a Hefeweizen?
the Hefeweizen is one of them. It'd be called lawn beer these days, country beer. Just the smaller breweries in Germany are tend to not filter their beers. It's a bit more sulfury. It's an emphasis on freshness, the same way you would kind of look at fresh bread. Um, the beers that you're used to here for export are one of the breweries I worked at, and of course, part of this joke was because there was an American among them working. Anytime they made a mistake, they said, "Oh, that's for exports. The Americans won't know the difference." But I tasted the beer in from the lager cellar. It was just utterly gorgeous. Well, by the time you get done filtering the hell out of it and pasteurizing it and stabilizing it and doing all that stuff, it just sucks all the life out of the beer. And I didn't want to make that beer. I wanted to make the beer that was sitting in the lager tank. So that's what I did. But and of course, thought I was all cool. I was young and one of a handful of brewers operating with a German brewing diploma and stubborn. Um, Probably should have just made pale ales and shut up, but I didn't want to do that. So what I wound up doing, we started a distillation program. I still had some really nice connections from brewing schools. So I worked in distilleries in Austria and Germany, making eau de vies, and I understand you guys have at least one of the eau de vies, if not two, with you today. Honestly, the order, Vadim, that's up to you. Honestly, this isn't a linear. These flavors are all over the place. They're all very big, and normally, I think a lot of folks would want to go from the lighter stuff to the heavier, but the spirits that you guys selected are all very big and very, very different, and the productions are different. The only suggestion I would have um, is to do the things that are made in the chamber still either first or last, because I know that's where a lot of the questions are going to be.
Well, so I'm looking at the whiskeys, and we have the Maryland style rye,
Okay.
the three-chamber rye, the Foder rye.
The food
And
rye. Yep, yep. So why don't we start with the Maryland rye, if that's okay with everybody?
perfect.
Um, so this is something that I came up with so I was just talking about this with a customer over the weekend. Uh, I have a tendency to make things that while my brother's on vacation. So it's a partnership where he does all of the financial stuff. He went to Northwestern for economics and industrial engineering, and then he got his master's from Stanford in environmental engineering. So basically, he does all the accounting, all the numbers, the kind of takes the lead on all our sustainability efforts. But of course, that also means any of you who've ever been in a production job, that means he can take vacations and I can't. So whenever he would take off on vacations, that's when I would tend to have a bit of fun and then ask for forgiveness instead of permission. So the Maryland rye I'd been reading about for a very long time. Maryland, I'm sure many of the folks on the call know, for a good solid 100 years was really a center for rye production. And the last distillery shut down in the 60s, a distillery called Baltimore Pure. And when I came up with the Maryland rye, there weren't any distilleries in Maryland that were making whiskey. And so to me, I kind of took it upon myself. This was over a decade ago to recreate and have some fun with a lost style. And the way I kind of look at it is the same way that I look at um, a West Coast IPA for those who are into beers, where you kind of your head goes to citrusy hops, but does every single brewery make the same beer? Of course not. And the same thing with the Maryland distilleries; they were all over the place. But generally speaking, I got a hold of some old mothballed samples of distilleries that I knew weren't using a chamber still, and they tended to lean into the fruit, lean into the spice, or lean into this fruit, lean into the floral notes, and pull back on the spicy notes. And the way to do that, again, I'm a German trained brewer, and you mentioned Hefeweizen, right? That spicy note that you get from Hefeweizen comes from a reaction of two things. First is a yeast strain, right? So in brewing parlance, you want to use a yeast strain that's called POF positive. And that what that means, it's from the perspective of a lager brewer, and that means phenolic off flavor. The phenolic off flavor is what you want when you're making a Hefeweizen. And that spiciness comes from a compound called 4-vinyl guaiacol. And 4-vinyl guaiacol is produced by using a yeast that will metabolize it. And I've learned over my career that not only do the distillers have no idea what the hell I'm talking about, customers certainly don't. All of the major yeast strains that are used, we're talking dry strains, cake strains, where the M strain, the MX strain that's used overseas, Red Star that's used in America. The easy to find yeast strains are all Hefeweizen yeast, basically. They're POF positive. But you have to feed that a compound called ferulic acid. So you start with the yeast and then you add ferulic acid. Ferulic acid is in trace amounts in most barleys. Um, Trace amounts for most barleys. Um, it's in trace amounts in barley. So even though you're using this Hefeweizen yeast and you're making a malt whiskey in Scotland or in Ireland, you're not going to get that reaction because you have the yeast strain, but you don't have the ferulic acid because it really doesn't appear in major quantities in barley varieties. Where it does show up is in wheat and rye, right? So as long as you're using that yeast strain and you're feeding it that ferulic acid that comes from wheat and rye, as a brewer, you're trained to add elevated quantities of the wheat to kind of trigger how much of that spiciness. So you're trying to get a balance in it of that spicy note when you're making that Hefeweizen. So it's balancing with the estery notes. In the case of Hefeweizen, either banana or with some nicer ones, pear flavors. Does that make sense? So long story short, when I use the Maryland rye, and if I want to pull back on that spice note, well, the easy thing to do is I just use a regular old ale yeast. So I'm using an ale yeast, a non-Hefeweizen strain for the Maryland rye. What does that do? You're still going to get some of those notes that you perceive as spiciness from other things just in the rye itself, but it's not going to be as heavy. So that's the first thing that I did was use that. I used a little bit of corn to sweeten it up. So it's 65% rye, 15% corn, and 20% malted barley. The 20% malted barley you're going to see in all the whiskeys that I made, and that's a leftover from pre-prohibition whiskeys. Generally speaking, when you're seeing these days, the most famous rye these days, I guess, is the 95.5 that everybody talks about from MGP, right? When you have that 5% malt that's in there, really what you're saying is you're adding enzymes out of a jug. The purpose to malt is the malt is where you get the enzyme package to take the long chain starches to chop them up into smaller bits in the mash tun. When you're mixing hot water with malt, it's going to activate the enzymes at specific temperatures. It's going to take the starch that's in the corn or in the rye and in the malted barley as well, and chop them up into maltose and other fermentable sugars, right? So that's the purpose to adding malt to it. When you start to see it below 10%, what the producer is telling you, generally speaking, is they're actually buying this stuff out of a jug. They're throwing it into the mash. It's perfectly legal in America. It's illegal in Scotland, by the way, or to call it scotch. It's illegal to do that. But when you looked at these old recipes from the 1800s when they were making bourbon and rye in particular, you keep seeing this 20% malt in it over and over again. To me, what that tells you is they're mashing naturally, right? And more often than not, they're just using brewer's malt. So brewer's malt, I'm sure you've all been to a brew pub and you go to a brewery and you see sacks of pale malt, that's brewer's malt, right? Brewer's malt as opposed to distiller's malt, to keep this from being an 8-hour episode. And I'm sorry, this is what I'm like. It's like drinking out of a fire hose, my assistants tell me.
We love
Uh,
it. Keep going.
yeah, great. Then that's good to hear. Um, so brewer's malt, it's kiln usually north of 170, 180 degrees. Okay. So it's where you're going to get the malt backbone. It's where you're going to get that mouthfeel when you're drinking a beer. For distillers, there's no such thing as mouthfeel in the sense that you're going to take that distiller's beer and you're going to turn it into a gas. So dextrins and things that give mouthfeel to a beer are irrelevant, right? So what do the distillers do? When you use distiller's malt, the warmest temperature that you're drying the germinated barley is at about 120 degrees. As a result, distiller's malt doesn't have any of those malty notes, doesn't have that background. It basically tastes almost identical to raw barley. So the point I'm making here is we're elevating that 20% in all of the whiskeys that you make. And so those of you who are fans of pot, pure pot or unpeated single malts, you're going to taste a lot of familiar flavors in our whiskeys. And I really, really like that. The reason that it went from 20% down to 5 is money, right? So malt is much more expensive, pardon me. Malt is much more expensive than raw corn or raw rye. And so it's a question of how much do you have to add? Now, that's not to say you can't make a beautiful whiskey at 95.5 or 100%. Of course you can. But the reason that was dropped, early on, it really was, an accounting choice. And to me, I really, really like that grassy note. So to me, with the Maryland rye, from my perspective, obviously everybody's going to have a different opinion here. It's very soft. It's very effervescent. It's bright. It's categorically different. Um, uh, it's categorically different than the 95.5s that are out there that are really just its own paradigm, which is pretty crazy when you think about it, because of course MGP for years was just, they looked at it as blending stock for the most part. And now of course, you hear folks are from the perspective of a distiller. It's interesting to hear people tell me that the rye whiskeys that we make are off profile, which is a bit of an odd thing to say, or even more comically to tell me that the three chamber rye is not a traditional rye when in fact it's the other way around. The other thing that you're going to notice, I ferment very, very cold. This is an affectation from German brewing. The preponderance, almost everybody in distilling likes to ferment warm, right? They like to push it into the 80s, into the 90s. The reason they like to do that is it creates a lot of esters. When you stress yeast out, when you push those temperatures up, when you stress it, it gives off esters. The biggest ester of all is ethyl acetate. Ethyl acetate is nail polish remover. In small quantities, it can be sweet and kind of nice. When you start to get up there, not only does the ethyl acetate start to taste like acetone, like nail polish remover, you're going to stress, generally speaking, the yeast out and create higher alcohols. And higher alcohols is just brewing and distilling parlance for alcohols that are longer chain than ethanol. And the easy way to just explain it is that it smells hot, right? Um, I like to ferment in the 60s, so much, much lower. And we also have something in common with Springbank. Those of you who are fans of Springbank distillers, I found out after, my goodness, 20 years into my career, they were nice enough to have me over in their maltings because we do our own floor maltings here. But before we opened it up, I got to head out to their place and kind of chat about their production. Um, they like to do really low gravity beers. And what that means is they're making a 6% alcohol beer. And this is pretty much, the standard both in both in the States and overseas was to make lower alcohol. Well, you can kind of make the math simple as to why that changed. The reason that folks went, just to make the math easy, from 5% up to 10% alcohol is the accountant showed up and says, why don't you just double our production simply by raising the alcohol concentration up? The problem with that is, in order to get the alcohol up, basically you're feeding the yeast more sugar and you're stressing it out. And again, when you stress that out, you're going to create a lot of those higher alcohols. You're going to create a lot of those esters, which are good and bad. And everybody has an opinion as to what it is you want on that. But generally speaking, I think the quality of the distillate is much better when you make a lower gravity beer. So that's what we do. So everything that you're going to be enjoying tonight on the whiskey side started out at just 6% alcohol. It makes a softer whiskey. I'm hoping you're going to notice, I think like a German brewer, I want to use the best possible ingredients and I want to showcase them. I want you to taste the barley. I want you to taste the malt. I want you to taste the Abruzzi rye that we have grown for us. I want you to taste, the corn that we've selected. And I want the barrel to work in concert with it without overpowering what it is we're doing. So I've learned in my career what folks are used to, I guess, more commercially available whiskeys is that they call it a craft funk. And to me, what I've learned that means is that you're getting some character from the grain, you're getting some character from the fermentation, and the barrel isn't necessarily the dominating force. Not that there's, I love those whiskeys too, but I'm really, chasing a different approach here where I want to showcase the work that we do in the grains. We malt over 1,000,000 pounds of grains on the floor every year, and I want you to taste the work that the crew is doing. So that's the Maryland rye. It is bottled. Our entry proof, kind of a fun little thing. Our bottled and bond 5-year-old Maryland rye is cask strength. So all of the whiskeys that we put down are at 50%. Again, this going back to the 1800s. That was the American standard. That was the American standard all the way until the 1960s. 1962, they raised the limit from 55% was the top, even though nobody was using it, to where we are today at 62.5. Why? Money. If you lift the lid off on the proof, you can put more whiskey into fewer barrels. You need fewer barrels. You need fewer rick houses. It saves money. And again, not to say you can't make a world-class whiskey at 62.5. Obviously you can, but it's going to change how that whiskey is. It's going to change, really. It's just going to make a different whiskey. The question is, do you like that different? We do not dump any of the whiskeys you're going to enjoy tonight. We decant them. So again, I think like a brewer, when you have a barrel of whiskey and you turn the thing upside down, all the char, if you've ever seen, I'm sure most of you have seen this before, the char flakes off and you'll have a couple cups of char. I never understood the convention of turning them upside down on a small scale. Big scale, it makes sense to me. But on a small scale, if you turn it upside down, okay, now you have to have a filter. Now you have to have a pump. You have to buy a bunch of crap. And again, I made unfiltered lager beer. When you filter something, things get trapped on the filter you don't necessarily want. You lose mouthfeel. Um, I think you lose a bit of flavor. I think you lose a bit of aroma. So everything you're going to enjoy today is unfiltered. Does anybody have any questions on the Maryland rye?
I'll start at the very back. The last thing you said, how, wait, I still don't understand. How do you make it unfiltered? Like, how do you get it out without the char? How do you unfilter?
We
Like,
have
I
a
know people that say like, oh, we don't do chill filtration. We do just like a mesh, which is fine.
right.
But what do you
So
mean completely
this
unfiltered?
it's a picture of stainless steel rod, a wand. So remember, it's been sitting in place. We fill our barrels in place and we empty them in place.
Oh, you don't rotate the barrels or anything.
Not at all.
Okay.
So it's had in 5 years for all of the particulates to settle. So all we do is we put in a stainless steel rod, and I just invented just a simple little thing. I put a spring at the bottom. So that makes it so that it's not pulling any of that char, but you're also leaving whiskey behind, which is great for two reasons. One, we have a single malt program that we've been running for years, and you're always going to leave a few hundred milliliters of whiskey left. And of course, all that char that has that bourbon or rye character in it, which is great. And then we have a partnership with a brewery named New Belgium Brewing. We've been working with them for 15 years. And when you're working with barrels, more often than not, when you get a used barrel, it's bone dry. Well, the ones we send them are not bone dry. And it leads to better beer projects in it where they're getting some really nice character as a result and can actually reuse them a few times to
Are
get the.
you making any single malt?
We have been for the last 5 years, and we'll release it when America figures out what the hell American single malt is. So I don't
We
know.
just passed the law for it. Oh,
Yeah, try selling it though.
yeah. No, I definitely want to do that.
Yeah, maybe another 5 or 10 years. I mean, I'm kidding, obviously, a little bit, but the we're using the three chamber still for it, and it's just an enormous whiskey. And it needs time. You're pulling a lot more grain out, more of the flavor of that grain out. So the way that we're making our single malt, we're making it with an eye towards blending, if that makes sense. So these are really big barrels of whiskey that needs to be either let it sit for 10 to 20 years, or we're going to need to blend it with something else to get the flavors where we want, where it's really going to add some very unique flavors to it. But I'm skipping ahead here. And any questions on the Maryland style rye? Either I'm doing a good job or I'm doing a horrible job. Are we doing okay here?
You're doing a great job.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. And I love the mouthfeel of it. It's not like your typical rye. I'm not really a yeah, it's just gorgeous to drink. Feels
Thank
good.
you. I'm very pleased with it. It scratched all the itches that I was looking for. I got some mothballed samples from some of the distilleries. It was much easier to do that, 15 years ago. Reached out to some historians, Michael Veach, Charles Cowdery, Noah Rothbaum, some of the other ones, and then you get passed around in the guys that would find rare bottles and put them in little 50 milliliter samples and kind of ship them around. It was a very uh, almost early internet kind of a thing at the time, and I was just trying to pull back on the spice and lean into the fruit and the floral, and I think I accomplished the goal. That my idea behind it, but I was not that I'm much brighter today, but I was younger and dumb, and my hope was that it was going to give you, the consumer, a way to sort out whiskey on a whiskey menu, right? Like you guys know high rye bourbon, right? My idea was, okay, Maryland style means pull back on the spice, lean into the fruit, lean into the floral, and it'll have a place to live on the menu, and it'll help consumers understand and find what they like. That was the idea. But I gave the keynote at the inaugural Maryland whiskey. I think it was called Festival, or I can't remember something like that. And I was telling that Sagamore and some of the other distillers, they had no interest in making whiskey the same way, right? Which is great, which is of course really cool. And I wouldn't do what the hell I said anyways, right? So it's kind of a neat thing. Now that the Maryland distilleries are back back in vogue. I did get a nice compliment. Brian Tracy, who was with Sagamore, told me how much easier I made it on Maryland distillers in Colorado and California, where we have a really nice market where they know what Maryland rye is and know what to expect. But when you see the description of Maryland rye out there, that was me that kept repeating that over and over and over again. And am I right? Of course not, because just like Pennsylvania rye, everybody made the rye a little bit different. And of course, the question is, okay, what year are you talking about? Are we talking about Maryland rye in the 1800s? Are we talking about it in the 50s and 60s? And these things are moving targets, and the Maryland distillers at the time didn't necessarily think about folks in 2025, one way or the other. But um, it sure was a really, really fun exercise for me. And the last thing I told the Maryland distillers, if you want me to take the word Maryland style off, I'll do it. But nobody asked me to do it. So we're just going to keep calling it Maryland style rye.
Yeah, I was curious, Todd. I was going to ask you if you've gotten any friction or anyone, calling you a tourist or anything like that for
No,
using
well,
Maryland.
it's kind of hard for them to say that because we released it before they even opened their doors. So it would be a bit of a hollow complaint, but at the same time, I would honor that. That's their state, right? But I mean, if you have the full bottle, it's pretty obvious, distilled by Leopold brothers. And so I honestly, that's a great, point, Nick. I kind of expected that. I thought somebody would ask me to take it off, and um, I'm a big, big believer in our distilling community in America and our states, and we take pride in these things, and these things are important. I would have done it. My brother may not have been very happy with me. Of course, I told him about it afterwards, and he kind of gave me. He's an older brother. If you haven't figured that out, those of you with siblings understand that dynamic never goes away. But I thought I would have to, Baltimore style, or I don't know, come up with something that would, get people to understand what it was while respecting the Maryland distillers. But you know, I stood in front of a room full of them. Not one person took me up on the offer, so I figure we're in the clear.
So you're not using actual grain from Baltimore.
Oh,
It's a style.
well, neither were the Maryland distillers.
Okay, fair enough.
Um, yeah, I don't know if you got, how much you got. Obviously, if you haven't figured out, I follow this. Historically, the variety of rye that we use was favored by Maryland distillers in the 1800s, and I know this from looking up old agricultural manuals where they're talking about distillers when they're talking about millers, milled grain, and the variety we use is called a bruisey rye. And normally you'd be able to tell what country that came from, but I'm a mutt American and have no accent, but it comes from Rome. It was brought over from Italy in the late 1800s, and the distillers just absolutely adored it. It has a high amounts of a compound, a general family of compounds that gives it that lovely floral note. So linalool is the name of the compound. It has elevated amounts of linalool, and that's why the distillers really, really liked it. But we got a handful of seeds from the USDA bank well over a decade ago now. And now we're growing in Colorado about 500,000 pounds of it a year. We're spoiled out this way because Coors, if you didn't know, has been malting barley since the 1800s out here. So we really have world-class grain farming out this way. And the farmers will grow anything that I ask them to grow and do just a beautiful job of it. The Abruzzi rye, because it's left over from the 1800s, it actually grows quite tall. Fans of the Nobel Prize know of Norman Borlaug. He invented dwarf wheat. And what that did was instead of being 6 feet tall, it grew 3, 4 feet tall. It makes it a lot more hardy in the environment. When you got those really tall stalks and you get, see moisture or a cold snap in the spring, that top heavy weight will fall over. It's called lodging. So when you see folks playing around with heirloom grains, that's a real big concern you have to do because If it truly is heirloom and they're left over from the 1800s, these are really, really tall plants. So every year we have to kind of hope we don't have a cold snap. And I get photos from our farmer here in Longmont, which is just up the road. Usually every other year he'll show me a photo of, a couple acres that he's lost because this distiller is dumb enough to ask him to use a Brucey rye instead of more modern strains. But it's been a wonderful relationship because we pay 3 times the going rate to have him planted. So he doesn't get commodity grain prices, and I get the exact kind of rye that I'm looking for. Any other questions on the Maryland rye?
That's awesome. The nose on this is very different. We've had the pleasure of tasting quite a few ryes. We actually did a barrel pick with Sagamore back in the days, and we recently had Catoctin Creek talk about why Virginia rye is different from all other rye. So this is really kind of eye-opening, and I'm really loving this conversation. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
On the
Anybody else?
nose, I would say this reminds me of like a grappa more than anything else, with like cracked black pepper on there.
Yeah. Oh no, I've had people say that on more than one occasion. Grappa, or if you have any rum fans out there, some rum agricole notes.
Yeah, I can see that.
So, I'm of the view that brewing and distilling is an agricultural practice. And the thing that Americans had to deal with that others didn't is we had prohibition. So before prohibition, we had hundreds of distilleries, thousands of distilleries. What am I talking about? Where every farmer, every miller, I mean, I'm exaggerating slightly, had stills and distilled apple brandy. They distilled pear brandy, peach brandy, anything they can get a hold of where they couldn't sell the crop and they had a way to unload it. This system is still in place in Austria. And in fact, one of the distilleries I worked at was the largest eau-de-vie distillery in Germany. And when I was outside, so this had to have been 2001, somewhere around there. And I was outside BSing with the master distiller, and a horse-drawn cart pulled up. And it had several, they looked like olive oil containers, stainless steel, about 5 gallons. An assistant came out, pulled a sample from it, handed it to the master distiller who nosed it, gave him the thumbs up, and then kept talking to me. And of course, I'm like, wait a minute, what the hell just happened? And it was a farmer, and this is widespread. They had dozens and dozens of farmers that would make pear brandy or Kirschwasser cherry brandy, and they would sell it to the larger distillery who would bottle it as their inexpensive mark because it wasn't very well distilled. But they blend it all together, maybe add a little bit of their more premium brandies and sell their very, very inexpensive line. It was from farmers all around. It was a way for them to make extra cash. And of course, we had that in the States until Prohibition. And then I'm sure folks remember Prohibition ended at the height of the Great Depression. And of course, the Great Depression, who the hell could afford copper? So we went from an agricultural practice to an entirely industrialized practice for whiskey production in one generation. But to me, I want you to taste the grain. I want you to taste the work that the farmer did, the maltsters did. In our case, that means us. And it really makes a very different kind of whiskey that is much more in line with what you would taste, in my opinion, before Prohibition. Any other questions on the Maryland rye before we move on? And by the way, I should ask, how long do I have so I don't talk too much for you folks?
There's no limit, Todd. We have a start time and no official end time. As long as you're having fun, we're having it.
Well, if you haven't figured it out, I can talk about this stuff all day long, but I don't want to abuse you.
Honestly, when I talk to brands, that's my number one request is the product is fine, but I want somebody who's passionate, and I'm glad we have you here tonight. So thank you.
Oh, you. I'll let you guys make the judgment, but obviously, if you haven't figured it out, I'm 30 years into my career, and if you haven't gathered from my tone until now, I whistle to work every morning, believe me. So
the nuttiness on the finish of this is so I'm getting like wafers or something on the back, just on the finish. And you are absolutely so right. There's no spice to this. It's got just a little bit of heat because it's 50%. but
Yeah,
the fruitiness and the nuttiness, and it's just so drinkable. This is spectacular.
thank you.
Yeah, you said West Coast IPAs earlier, and that it reminds me of crushable. It's the word, not probably overly
Yeah.
reductive, but that's what it kind of reminds me of. It's a crushable.
Well, remember, again, I started as a brewer. I don't think there's such thing, but I'm going to say it. This is a session whiskey, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
like, if you want to sit on the edge of a dock and ponder death, like Springbank 18's your go-to. This is a much more, it's a much more sprightly whiskey. There's a lot going on, and I noticed the chamomile comment and the black tea. That's all those layers of linalool that I'm talking about,
Okay.
and you can understand why I leaned into it, right? Because it's interesting.
Yeah,
It-
literally, I take chamomile before I go to bed, and it tastes like just like a better version.
It's the same, and of course, well, I was about to say, of course, I've been making liqueurs, and we made America's first Amaro, America's first Fernet, America. You get the idea. We've had a lot of firsts. We've been working with them, and the apple and pear, by the way. So the yeast strain that I use now, this is how I roll, guys. I hope it's okay. The dominant yeast strains, generally speaking, if we're setting aside the bean yeast, which leans into isoamyl acetate, which tastes like bananas, banana custard, that's the beam strain that they like to use. The dominant note that you get from Kentucky whiskeys is isobutyl acetate, stone fruit, cherries, right? So to me, your Buffalo Trace, your Wild Turkey, and these are beautiful notes. These are, if you haven't figured it out, I want to make sure I say this so that folks don't misunderstand me. I worship these distilleries. I have no interest in making their whiskeys. Who the hell wants to compete head to head with Buffalo Trace or the Russell family? I have no, and what I mean is I'm picking yeast strains that aren't going to lean into that and instead lean into apple, pear, lighter fruit, so peaches. So the esters that I'm looking for with the yeast strains that we select are on a completely different spectrum. So what I've
That's
learned,
obvious.
pardon?
That's obvious. It is totally a different animal.
Yes. So now, of course, the question is, is that your thing? Um, so what we've learned, the things we've had to deal with for the last, for our whiskey program really is only 10, 15 years old. Um, is for people to assume I have no idea what I'm talking about because my last name is Russell, because it doesn't taste like Kentucky whiskey. They've already done it. Like, I can't make the beautiful whiskeys that they can at the price that they're at. So why would I do that? So we're leaning into other things. To me, that's what whiskey's all about, and it is having these different choices, and when we're getting an audience where people understand that we are not Kentucky, we are not Tennessee, and that is an intentional choice. And the issue just becomes, is that your jam? But if you're expecting all of those whiskeys, like the 95.5 rye, part of the thing that I have to deal with as a distiller is folks that are new to bourbon and rye don't understand how many bottles are literally the same thing. From the non-distilling producers where it's MGP over and over again. So they come to think, well, that's obviously what rye is supposed to taste like. That's certainly one way to go. Yeah, and yeah, it's like drinking weed. Well, if you want to go down that rabbit hole, again, there are flavors that overlay all of these things. We're from Colorado, so we've got a grow house directly across the street from us. Uh, so you're going to smell weed out here, whether you want to or not. The Coloradans don't leave you with much of a choice.
I used to permit those facilities. So when that first got legalized in Colorado,
Oh, no kidding.
and one of the biggest complaints was that the odor people would say it would like actually flavor their food and their gardens and stuff.
I can see that when if it's a big enough grow house, we don't complain. Yeah, they're neighbors. Um, but yeah, you're gonna get very similar flavors. These cereals and these plants all have flavor chemistry and aroma chemistry that's not that far off. Rye, from a flavor and aroma standpoint, the varieties of rye and where you grow them, the flavors are all over the place. And for years and years and years, if you folks didn't know, the big producers got their rye from Germany, because it was the quality that they wanted. Germans don't treat rye like a cover crop. They're a bunch of brewers and a bunch of engineers. Um, I say that giggling, but in a very good way. Their quality control was more of what they were used to. Canada, I was just the keynote speaker at the Canadian Whiskey Symposium a couple months ago. And of course, they're known for rye. The problem with the way their laws work is that they can label anything rye. If you didn't know that, it could be 100% corn and they can call it Canadian rye. It's just one of those quirky things. So, of course, what does that do to your understanding of what rye tastes like? It's going to completely throw it off because they do single fermentations of each grain. So they'll ferment and distill corn, ferment and distill rye, ferment and distill malt. And then they'll blend them in barrels afterwards to get the profile that they're looking for, which is incredibly confusing as an American if you don't know these things. But anyways, rye in Maryland and Pennsylvania, looking at these old manuals, by the way, from the 1800s, generally speaking, their preferred growing regions, this is the 1800s, was Michigan and the Dakotas, FYI. But generally speaking, we're talking on the large scale. There wasn't a whole lot of rye being grown on the eastern seaboard. There just wasn't. Smaller distillers, sure. But when we're talking about post-prohibition, the big plants, they were getting it from further out to the west where it was drier. Growing grain, really anywhere east of the Mississippi can always be a pain in the butt because of moisture. Moisture content leads to all kinds of pests, and rye in particular is susceptible to ergot. And those who aren't familiar with ergot makes you can make you hallucinate really badly, and then your kidneys shut down. So not a very fun day.
Wasn't some of the Salem witch trials blamed on moldy rye? Like,
Yeah, it it tracks. It's certainly possible. It's certainly possible. And of course, storage wasn't understood. And when you store grain, it builds up heat. You can get a fire, can be a common thing, but these days, most grain storage bins have air that blows up and out the top. It keeps heat from building up. It keeps it dry. As you can tell, a phone call with me can last 10 hours, by the way, if you let me go. So perhaps we should move on to the next whiskey. Yeah.
Are you an attorney? Do you charge by the point one? 1 cent by the hour?
Well, so you mentioned the you know what, you have the lime cordial there, don't you, for everybody?
We do, yeah.
Let's change gears.
Whoa.
Let's
Unexpected. Twist of turn. All right, let's do it.
change gears. There's honestly, it's going to be good. So one of the things that I do when I'm crafting new spirits and doing new, we do gin, we have an absinthe. One of the tricks that I do to correct my nose, if I'm trying to taste through barrels, for example, I always have an open bottle of gin. It recenters where my brain is. I get palate fatigue and nose fatigue. If I'm just going through a row of rye barrels, I have a difficult time being able to tell the difference between the two or five or whatever the hell it is. And I like to recenter my nose by switching over to an entirely different spirit. It's an incredibly helpful thing. So the orange cordial. So this is a distilled cordial. So what that means is I'm starting with neutral spirit. I'm filling it into a pot still. We have eau de vie stills that are designed really to They're finesse stills. It allows me to make a lot of choices. We have plates, 6 plates in it. I can turn them on, I can turn them off. I have a deflegmator, and what that means is, if you can picture, this is the pot. How do I do this? This is the pot where the liquid is. It's boiling, and the vapor is traveling up to the top. This top surface, before it goes to the line arm to condense and come out as spirit, you run cool water through it, and you can set it to a specific temperature. And it's kind of like, it makes it so that you can, using water, you can change the shape of the still. So in other words,
Who else
picture,
does that?
pardon?
We were just talking about this in Scotland. Somebody else, that's like a thing that
Yes.
distilleries do.
It's a way to increase the reflux, the condensation. So in other words, when you've got your normal sides of your still, just picture that this is a swan's neck on a pot still in Scotland. The boiling stuff is sitting down there. The entire still is uninsulated. The temperature on the inside of the still is obviously, with all the boiling stuff, is quite high. And then on the outside, it's room temperature. That's why distilleries used to shut down and do maintenance during August, because the temperature outside would be so hot, it wouldn't properly condense. So in other words, you got the vapor traveling up, it's hitting this cooled surface, condensing and falling down. So an easy way to think of it, and this is really oversimplifying things. Let's say I take a 6% alcohol distiller's beer and I distill it once, right? It's going to come off of the still at our place anyways at about 30. Now, let's say my brother has nothing but money to burn. I could take the swan's neck and double the size of it. So now I have twice the surface area for that reaction to occur, for the heavier flavors to condense and fall back down. The lighter ones will go on, i.e. ethanol. So what that does, it's going to make it so the flavor goes down and the proof goes up. Does that make sense? With a deflegmator, I can do the same thing and adjust it simply by changing the temperature of that surface to whatever the hell I want. Make sense? So if I'm, let's say, to make the math easy, let's say I want to hold the temperature of this surface at 180 degrees. I can run water through it so that it does that. Okay, there's too much flavor. I'm not happy with it. It's too raw of a spirit. I can drop that down to 175 degrees. So what's going to happen? You're going to get a lot more condensation. The heavier flavors are going to condense, stay down in the pot, and the proof goes up. So this is called an eau de vie still. It's what they use in Austria and Germany to make the aforementioned Kirsch and Williams pear and that sort of thing. And it's just really a finesse thing where you can finesse the best flavors and aromas out of whatever the hell you're putting in the pot. In this case, we're talking about lime peel. I'm going to put the lime peels in, bring it to a boil. The flavors and aromas are going to condense, and now I have what's called perfume spirit. So I've got that spirit. I'm unhappy with it. I don't think that it's big enough. I don't think it's aromatic enough. So what am I going to do? I'm going to put it back into the pot still. I'm going to add more lime peel and distill it again. This is when the understanding of what triple sec used to mean. It used to mean triple distilled, where you're distilling orange peel over and over again to make it bigger, 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 bigger. So the lime that you're enjoying, these are Gulf Coast limes. Really love the aromas. To me, I get lovely aromas of not just lime, but lime flowers. I'd been distilling these for years, couldn't figure out what the hell to do with it, and finally realized what the problem was, is that I can distill it on its own, but it needs acidity. So as this relates to the whiskey that you guys have with the bourbon, there's a little bit of end fermented bourbon in it, right? So when you ferment out bourbon, we have open fermenters or open wooden fermenters. For us, the way that we do our fermentations, we do 72 hours, and then after that, we let it ferment for another 48 hours. And if you didn't know, the malt that I keep talking about, this is where the importance of that 20% comes in. Malt is rife with lactic acid bacteria. So after the fermentation is finished in these open fermenters, I let it sit for an extra 48 hours. The modern distillers will go straight to the still. The reason I let it sit an extra 48 hours is now the yeast has consumed all the fermentable sugars. Now the lactic acid that's sitting in that malt can eat things that the yeast can't. And the reason that I'm letting this happen is when the lactic acid bacteria eats these compounds, you'll literally see a white film over the top of it. It's creating a massive quantity of organic acids, in particular acetic acid. So think vinegar. But there's a simple reaction. As I mentioned, I like to ferment cold. I'm not trying to push the esters in the fermentation. Where I try to do it, I try to overload the barrels with organic acids. And over time, acetic acid and lactic acid will react with oxygen that goes into the barrel to create esters. So our esterification, we're going after it in the barrels instead of the fermenter. So as the years keep passing, our esters are building and building and building and building and building. It's getting more fruity. It's getting more depth to it. Um, and that's how we handle using those lower fermentation temperatures, but you're still getting esters. So the esters and the fruity notes that you're getting in the Maryland rye, it's coming from those organic acid reaction. But in the case of the lime that you're tasting, all I do is I take that lactic acid, I skim some off of the top, I filter it several times, and then I'm adding it back into the lime cordial that you're enjoying. To me, this goes great in tequila drinks, great in margaritas. You can use it as a float. By far, the favorite way to have it in the Leopold crew is Negra Modelo. Have a sip of it, and then top the neck off, and you're done. And that's the sour lime cordial.
How much sugar, how many grams of sugar is there in a liter?
So most of the American cordials on the market these days are somewhere between 25 and 30. Everything that we do is 20 or less. I believe off the top of my head, what you're enjoying right now is about 16 grams of sugar. So I like to be dry. The more you elevate that sugar, even if you take beautiful real materials, it has a tendency to make it taste like cough syrup and fake. So I like
That's a cane sugar?
It is cane. Great, God, great questions today. Yes, cane sugar. Cane sugar. We use all different kinds of sugar depending on what it is I'm looking for in our cordials. Everything from honey to Belgian candy sugar. Sugar beets are a thing that we can do here. But I like cane. I like the cleanness of it because I'm trying to in this particular case give a very neutral sugar to showcase those limes as best as I can.
And what the process once it's finished this distillation? What container? How long?
Stainless steel. I'm not looking for oak. I'm not looking for anything else. And I'm taking the distillate. I'm adding cane sugar. I'm adding water, and I'm bottling it at 40%.
How long it's sitting in the tanks?
2 weeks tops.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. Everything that we do, and I'm a big believer in what winemakers would call bottle shock. After you bottle a bourbon or bottle a gin, we do our best to let it sit for a couple of weeks before we ship it out. I can tell the difference between when you've mixed it up and when you've bottled it. You're filling it, you're mixing it with air. It takes time for it to relax in the bottle, in my opinion. Can't really draw any scientific reasons for it, but sometimes superstition's a good thing. Any other questions on this? Are you getting, hopefully you're getting the nose that I'm talking about, the flowers a little bit. I just really enjoy it, and a little bit goes a long way in a cocktail. And of course, the easiest cocktail in the world is a highball. Just 2 ounces on the rocks, hit it with soda water. The soda water lightens it. It brings up that beautiful lime flower note to your nose, and it's refreshing as hell.
It'd be interesting to know why you settled on 40% and not, proof down like a lot of more liqueurs.
That's a great question, because the flavor comes from the distillate, right? And the aroma comes from the distillate. So if I drop that down to 20, I've now cut down the flavor and the aroma in half. So this is a distilled cordial. There aren't too many of them out there. Usually they're infusions where you're adding the flavor directly into the liquid. Then the proof doesn't matter. But in this case, the distillate is carrying the day. And it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek poke, I guess, at Cointreau or the others that are at that higher proof. I've learned in working with bartenders over 25 years, they always want it bigger. So that's what I did. You want big? Here you go.
Yeah, it's delicious. It's like finishing off that liquid in the Luigi's water ice when it's
Oh,
with it.
That's a nice compliment. I'll take it. It's a fun ingredient to work with. I've tried it. You know, I'd been distilling these for years and just couldn't figure out what the hell to put it in. I've did a gin 25, didn't fit. Yeah, I couldn't figure out what to work with it, and I sent it to a couple really good friends running great bars in San Francisco, and I said I can't tell if this is really cool or really stupid, and they're bartenders, so of course they said both. You're an idiot. Always count on bartenders to put you in your place. Um, but it's just a really fun. It's a really fun ingredient to play with, and it's very one of a kind, which is kind of my favorite thing. There really isn't anything unless you want to throw out roses, or I mean, real curveball would be velvet falernum, but this really has nothing to do with any of those things. It's just a really fun spirit.
I could smell a little bit of the bitterness from the pith and the peel. And
Mhm.
this reminded me a little bit of, I just recently got a bottle of Italicus.
Yeah,
And
bergamot.
so,
Yeah,
yeah, so
yeah we use bergamot in our summer gin. Um, it's a really fun ingredient to work with. The question is a distiller, how much of that do you want? How much pith? The sensation of that pith can be a good or a bad thing depending on what you're looking for. In America, flavor chemists stay the hell away from it, right? And just want whatever it is they think of as a lime on a tree. What I tend to look at when I'm using these ingredients is I look at them for more like cooking. So with our working with peaches, for example, I want it to taste more like peach preserves, because so many folks are familiar with that, and less like what a flavor chemist thinks a peach tastes like. Um, yeah, that's just how I look at these things. Should we move on? Anybody have any more questions?
we went from Maryland rye to the sour lime cordial. What are
Yeah.
we doing next?
How about pick something from the three chamber, and then that way we can kind of set the tone for the rest of
All
it.
right,
How's that?
three chamber rye it is, the 50%er.
All right.
Perfect.
So this is something I was lucky enough to come across. I started a business in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Ann Arbor it's a college town, University of Michigan. And about 15 or so years ago, um, Google set up an office there, and we were very much the nerd bar in town. It's where grad students would come and hang out. Uh, One of my favorite stories about the bar is a huge place. We were the closest part of the University of Michigan football stadium. And the only time we almost had a fight at our bar was because 5 University of Michigan engineering students showed up at opening so that they could get a game of Risk in. We had board games there. Any of you who played the game Risk before, inevitably somebody gets pissed off and feels like they're getting picked on, which is, of course, kind of the whole point of the game. Somebody's going to end up mad. Well, you guys can't tell, but I'm about 6'3" and look a bit like a silverback gorilla. Okay, now picture 5 typical engineering students who are not that. And I was finishing up with a brew, and one of them, when I was out getting a glass of water, tipped the Risk board over because he was so mad. And of course, I can't, and it knocked over a few pint glasses. And I, of course, ran over to see what the hell was going on, which terrified the engineering students. And then when they told me what happened, I was laughing so hard I bought them all around. And of course, the kid who tipped the board over stormed out. So that was the closest to a bar fight we ever had at Leopold Brothers, if that tells you what a full-on nerdy bar it was. But anyways, we had a bunch of Google employees, and they would hang out at our place. And if you haven't figured out, I have a very curious mind. And so I'm asking them about what they're doing. Well, they were starting the digitization process of the University of Michigan. And for a Gen Xer being told this, and I don't know what year it was, 04, 05, whatever the hell it was, it just blew my mind. Well, I started to realize that they could search things for me. And so I, gave them some search terms to look at for malting, for brewing, for distilling, anything that you find. And they figured out after a while I'd buy them rounds if they showed up with something cool. Well, one of them showed up with what is now somewhat famous in the whiskey world, the Crampton and Tolman paper, and I was the lucky American distiller to come across this 15, whatever, I don't know how many years ago it was. And what it was after the Bottled and Bond Act of 1897, the IRS was in charge of spirits at the time. And they decided that they're going to put together the rules for American whiskey because there weren't any. You could take milk and label it as whiskey, and there's really nobody to stop you on a federal level. So they did the wise thing, which I always like saying to folks who don't particularly care for the IRS, never say they didn't do anything for you. They did this for you. They did a survey of 31 different distilleries in America, roughly half made rye, half made bourbon, and they broke everything down, everything. What was the warehouse heated where they stored it? What was the grist recipe? How big were the stills? What kind of still? What was the entry proof? This, by the way, is the paper where I found every single distillery in this survey. Their entry proof was 50% and the high was 50.5. So that's where I got that low entry proof from. And the easy way to think of why that's an important thing, setting aside all the chemical reactions that differ because of alcohol. Alcohol is a solvent, water is a solvent. It's going to extract different things. It's going to change the rate of esterification and other things. But the easy thing to understand is if you're putting in your whiskey at 50% and it comes time to bottle it at Bottled and Bond, you don't have to add a whole lot of water. If you start at that 62.5%, and I'm sure you guys have had hazmat whiskeys that drift all the way up into almost 70%. What does that mean when you're bottling it? You're adding more than you're adding dishwater. You're making dishwater whiskey. You're diluting the hell out of what makes them so glorious. It's why so many people like cask strength. In my mind, it's not the actual alcohol. It's when you're cutting it with water, you're diluting all the other flavors. So that's why I like that lower entry proof. Anyways, out of all of the rye whiskey producers, every single one of them used what was called a 3-chamber still. And I'm like, what the hell is a 3-chamber still, right? I've never heard of this. And why are all these distilleries? It's not one. It wouldn't have interested me if there were 1 or 2 distillers, but everybody was using this freaking thing. So I start to ask around. None of the distillers that I knew, I didn't know too many of them, but none of the legacy distillers had any idea what I was talking about. And I did the keynote close at the Beam Institute 2 months ago. And I can assure you that those distillers didn't have an idea about a 3-chamber still either. What I told them was news to them. But as I started to do some more research and look into this 3-chamber still, I was realizing that Maryland distillers were using it. Baltimore Pure that I mentioned had one. Old Overholt, fans of Old Overholt here? They had rows of them. As far as I can tell, Old Overholt is the one distillery that I am 99% sure never diluted it, never cut it with anything else, and you were buying pure 3-chamber rye from them, by the way. So the chamber still, I have a YouTube video that explains it much better than I'm going to be able to explain it to you because it has illustrations, and even though I've done this a million times, it can be awful hard to describe. It's a batching system where you have one still on top of the other. It's designed so you can inject live steam into the bottom chamber where there's mash, and it's going to go up through this mash at the bottom, through the chamber above it, and through the chamber above it, on the way to a condenser. You don't have to worry about that. The important thing to understand is with that bottom chamber where you're injecting that steam from the bottom, you've got 10 feet of head on top of it, 10 feet of overpressure. That's going to drive the temperature of the bottom chamber of the chamber still when you're running it to somewhere between 220 and 230 degrees. Think about a pot still or a column still. These are open systems. So the warmest temperature in a column or a pot is usually around 198 degrees, and that's when you're into tails for the pot anyways. For the column still, an easy way to think of the column still, you've got your still, you've got your fermented mash that's being pumped into this column. They're usually 2-3 feet in diameter. The wider it is, the more capacity that you have. Each one of in the column, you've got several plates in it, a couple dozen plates, and it's designed so that you can pump live steam into the bottom of the column, and it's going to bubble up through each one of these plates on the way to the condenser. The plates all have downcomers on it. And the downcomer is just basically, it's just makes it so that you can take the top of the still and you can pump mash into it, and the mash cascades, zigzags down that still, crossing each one of these plates and going down to the next one. Does that make sense? So the downcomer just makes it so that once the match gets over that the top of that downcomer on a given plate, it's going to travel down that pipe to the next one, right? So it's making it so each one of the plates has constantly flowing mash that's going over the side. It's about it depends on the distillery, blah, 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 inch or two thick through it, right? And you're driving live steam up through those plates, and it's going to strip the alcohol out on the way to the condenser. The only important thing you need to know about this is the entry of the fermented mash at that 6 to 10% into the column until it leaves the bottom of the still as animal feed is 90 seconds. So all the major producers are using these column stills. It's 90 seconds of thermal treatment, and that's it. For the and again, the warmest temperature is about 198 degrees. The chamber still, as I mentioned, you've got mash that's sitting on top of each other, 3 chambers high. And the easy way to explain it, it's a batching system. And let's say that I just collected heads, hearts, and tails running live steam bubbling through all the 3 chambers. I just shut it off. I collected heads, hearts, and tails. The mash in that bottom chamber is now animal feed. I'll pump it out. And then I'll use valves on the side of the still and gravity to move the mash in the chamber above it down 1, the mash in the chamber above it down 1, top it off the top chamber out of the beer well, and then start the steam again and collect heads, hearts, and tails. So instead of 90 seconds, that process, you're going to run 1 mash through the top chamber, the middle chamber, and the bottom by the time you're done. And the heads, hearts, and tail run that I told you about takes about 30 minutes. So it's 30 minutes of heat treatment, 30 minutes of heat treatment, 30 minutes of heat treatment. So it's a lot more time. It's unbelievably inefficient. In fact, Vendome was good enough to do the math on our 3 chambers still. If you took the same copper, it's about 20 feet tall, 5 foot in diameter. And when you, if you took that same amount of copper and turned it into a continuous still, a column still, you could get easily 200 barrels a day. And our 3 chamber still gives you 2. So you should be laughing. I'm an idiot, right? So now you understand why they disappeared, okay? But because it's incredibly inefficient, but the distillers love them. So as I started working with proper historians like Noah Rothbaum and David Wondrich, what I wound up finding out is it wasn't just rye distillers that were using them. Bourbon distillers used it. Jack Daniels used a chamber still. Everybody's famous Old Fitzgerald, chamber still. Old Judge, chamber still. George Dickel, chamber still. They disappeared because of the Stitzel brothers, chamber still. They were using this still because the distillers like the extraction and the flavors and the palatefulness that you get from it that you can't get from a column. The intermediate step that they wind up doing that you saw Hiram Walker, for instance, had a chamber still, but what they were doing is they were using it as a flavoring ingredient. So the easy parlance to use for you guys is to look to Johnny Walker. How's Johnny Walker made? You take your super flavorful Springbanks or Lafrogue or Lagavulin, right? And you're adding 1 or 2% of the super characterful whiskey, and you're adding it to lighter distilled grain whiskey that's distilled in a column. Now you got Johnny Walker. Make sense? Same paradigm as what they were using. They used it in Canada. They still use this system in Canada, except for not with the chambers still. I had the head distiller at the big plant up in Quebec out a few weeks ago, and he told me he had a photo of the original Hiram Walker still. They had a 3-chamber still, he said, that was 25 foot wide, if you can try and picture that. And all I'm trying to picture is the boiler that powers it, by the way. But anyways, so this is making the way that I describe it, that elevated temperature going all the way up to 230 degrees. That bottom chamber is where it's at. By the time you've gone through 2 distillations and you're starting the steam on this for a 3rd time, this is almost water. At this point, the bottom chamber is working like a water still, and it's extracting a crap ton of oils. I call it an oil extraction machine. It's pulling oil out of that rye. It's going to be stabilized because the chamber that's above it is half alcohol, half water. And obviously the one that's at the top that's just been introduced to the 3-chamber still for this batch has the full amount of alcohol in it, right? It's that full 6%. So it's 3 distillations in one. It's extracting a ton of oil. It's driving the vapor through all of it onto the way of the condenser. And when we're running it and you look at the spirit safe where the spirit overflows, where you see the hydrometer bobbing in it, it'll throw a meniscus even at 70%, which means it should be, excuse me, thin as hell. It throws a meniscus even at 70%, that's several centimeters high. It's crazy. So what you're enjoying is, I believe, 6-year-old 3-chamber. Is that what you guys got? It's 80% of Bruisey Rye, 20% malt, distilled on the chamber still once, comes off in the ballpark of 65% alcohol. We slowly proof it down to 50, put it into the number 4 char barrel. As I mentioned, we're just decanting it off. And to me, there's no aroma like it out there. The mouthfeel is just completely different. And what you are drinking is what pre-prohibition rye or even post-prohibition in terms of Old Overholt. To me, this is traditional rye that was incredibly popular before prohibition, and there's really nothing like it out there in the world.
So I
I've
think
got a question. I was reading up on the different column stills and why coffee ended up being the one that kind of succeeded, whereas Stein and Baptiste didn't. But all the descriptions of why they ended up not liking Stein's kind of sound like the reason, all the things you're getting out of the 3-chamber. So is the 3-chamber really like an evolution of the old Robert Stein still, or did it come off completely on its own through industrialization?
It came off completely through its own.
Okay.
In my opinion, it really is its own animal. It's really designed for extracting as much possible aroma and flavor out of it. The rest of the techniques I use are important because you can wind up pulling out a whole bunch of stuff you don't necessarily want if you're fermenting at a much higher temperature, for example, and a much higher gravity makes the still behave differently. So that 6% alcohol that I use for it, in my opinion, is important for the rye character. I also came to find that both apples and peaches were distilled on it in the Midwest and Indiana in particular. We're using chamber stills again for the same reason. It also gets rid of the foaming issue. I don't know if you've ever heard a rye distiller bitch about the foam. By the way, the the way to get rid of foaming issues in the fermenters is don't pitch it so freaking hot. So if you can think about slowing down the fermentation, even by a couple of hours, it's making it so you're not generating as much foam over time, and it makes it really gentle. The crew will tell you, it's myself and 5 others in production that are making all the spirits and the malt that we make together. And they'll tell you if they miss the starting temperature of the rye by a degree, everybody will know because you'll come in the morning and it's got a foam over. So temperature control is really, really important on that side. But anyways, the 3-chamber still, because the chambers are relatively big, gets rid of the issue of dealing with foaming. And to me, I just think it makes an absolutely glorious rye whiskey that's unlike anything else. And we put that in just about 10 years ago, I guess now. We're going to be releasing a 8-year-old bottle, but we're kind of choking back and holding on supply because what we're looking for, I think it's going to be exactly where it is I wanted it at 10 years old. So we'll start to release larger quantities when it hits 10. More questions?
Oh, so of all these that we've tasted so far, this is the only one that uses a 3-chamber still?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And
Other
for those of us tasting at home, I'm pretty sure this is the 8-year.
Great. Oh, awesome. Even better. Yeah, to me, really the difference is, especially those of you who have purchased the younger I was very glad that I released it at 4 years, just so people could understand what it was and what those flavors were. But I had more than a few people at that 4 year, tell me it just tasted like rye pasta, or somebody it was a really great description, even though he didn't care for it. He called it rye agricole, which kind of hits the target. Now, now the esters, as I mentioned, the way that we distill and the way that we mature, and yes, I'll talk about the collaboration. 8 year, the esters are really finally catching up. So as I mentioned, I use a Bruzy rye on this. This was the rye that these distillers were gushing about and talking about, elevated amounts of linalool. The new make from this tastes absolutely like somebody snuck in overnight and jammed lavender in the condenser. It's so intensely floral. So the maturation queue is really different for the 3-chamber rye. What you're waiting for, that linalool isn't going anywhere. And it's a question of how long does it take for the wood sugars and the esters to catch up to make a balanced whiskey. And I'm really happy with where it is at 8. And I think these extra 2 years are really going to get it where it is we need to go. Does anybody else have any questions about the 3-chamber itself before I talk about the collaboration? Any comments? Is it different? Is this the first time you've had it? And anyone? Nope. Shy group.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, this is my first time having this, and I was really excited to learn about it. It's interesting to me where I'm glad you described it as you did. It's kind of like a triple distillation, but you're reusing all the parts of the distillation. So you're squeezing out every ounce of flavor from every part of the initial product. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I kind of got out of it.
No, that's generally accurate. Grassy hay note is spot on. That's that 20% distiller's malt. You're going to get a lot of those agricultural notes in it. You're not going to get that from column distilled. The 95.5 is just going to be a completely different paradigm. The really, really lovely thing is I've had, a few historians before we got the thing, and then fans were nice enough. There's a cachet of Old Overholt that was put in an auction, I guess, 8-10 years ago. Carnegie Mellon, if you guys know Carnegie Mellon University, Mellon owned Old Overholt, was the head of what was it, U.S. Treasury, I think he was, during Prohibition. And through a coincidence, I'm sure, his distillery stayed open during Prohibition. But somebody sold one of his mansions or building, and they found a skid, a quarter of a skid of Old Overholt that was bottled in 1917. So I got to taste the side by side. Those of you who are familiar with David Wondrich, he wrote the Oxford Companion to Spirits, the phone book on spirits. It's an international book. And he was nice enough to taste it was his sample. And he's like, Todd, the flavors are, I'm getting all the same notes. Really nice job. So it was that was a very good day for the team. But yeah, it's very much grassy note. Does anybody dig it? Is anybody enjoying it?
Yeah, definitely.
Good. Okay. I just wanted to make sure. I can't tell from the screen if you guys are pouring it on your carpet or enjoying it. And I just thought, if you don't care for it, wonderful. Everybody has different taste buds. There's nothing wrong with not liking our stuff. And we're not McDonald's. We're not going for the common denominator. So I can't imagine everybody liking everything we're going to have tonight, but we'll find out. The collaboration, the reason that I did that was that was a really wonderful, happenstance, because as I mentioned, Hiram Walker was using 3-chamber and blending it with column. Baltimore Pure was doing that. So we're coming across these instances where I believe that if you ordered a cocktail at the Savoy, for example, before Prohibition, what you were getting more often than not on your high end, unless you were calling for an Old Overholt or something like that, what I believe you were getting is 3-chamber and column, that's what you were getting. The reason I say that, as proud as I am of the 3-chamber rye, it makes the worst Manhattan, to my palate anyways, I've ever had. The flavors just don't work. But anyways, so I knew this, so I wanted to come out with 2 things that hadn't been tasted in at least 50 plus years. And so I didn't want to just buy MGP. There's nothing wrong with it, but I wanted to work with another distiller. And so I reached out to Nicole Austin, the master distiller at George Dickel at the time, and because I'd known her for a decade, and she knows everybody. She's everybody's favorite, and just a delightful person and a very talented blender. Because George Dickel, if you didn't know, that their rye is MGP White Dog that they run through their charcoal mellowing and then barrel. So I didn't think they made a rye, so I figured she knows somebody that might want to play and have some fun. Well, I sent her this note in December of 2020, peak COVID, and she said, "I'll call you tomorrow." And it just so happened that Dickel had made rye about five years before 2015 or whatever year they made it, somewhere around there. And we're trying to figure out what the hell to do with it. And would you like to collaborate with George Dickel? And I'm no dummy. The idea of working with a heritage legacy distiller like that's a distiller's dream. And so with a whole lot of skepticism, if you don't know, George Dickel is owned by Diageo. The idea of Diageo working with a dinky little distiller, we just couldn't see that happening. All I was picturing is, like some Pink Floyd video with hundreds of people who can say no, and all it takes is one. But Nicole got it all the way through. And what's really beautiful about this on so many levels. So first of all, she did the blend. So we send barrels of our 3-chamber rye down to Tullahoma where she does the blend. And she'll tell you that she drove her bottling crew crazy because the 3-chamber still is so oily and so enormous that even a third of a percentage point completely changes the whiskey. So you can imagine how many weeks it takes to get the blend, because you don't want to add too much. And it's all over the place, the percentage that she puts in there. And so she did the blend, and she sent me the samples, and she sent me her rye whiskey, and of course I had ours, and then the blends. And when she sent me that blend, I'm like, oh Jesus, this is what I like seeing the longest finish. Yeah, that's the oils. It coats your tongue physically. It's a physical reaction. The oils are holding the flavors to the inside of your mouth. It goes on for days. But when she sent the first samples, I'm like, oh, there you go. This is what the 3-chamber rye is, because the way that I distill, as the gentleman was mentioning before about the pears and the apples, and then we're talking about the Tennessee. Now we're talking about the isobutyl acetate, the raspberries, and the rest of it. It just winds up fitting together to make something that, to my palate, it's better than either one on its own. In terms of making a total product. The great thing about this is, from a consumer perspective, from a small distiller perspective, Diageo doesn't own a single share of us. It's my brother and I. We own it outright. So all that they're doing is the same thing that Johnny Walker used to do. Johnny Walker kept the lights on at all of these distilleries in the 60s and 70s that nobody was buying. If you guys, I'm sure many of you are aware of this history. The only way that they were keeping the lights on was selling barrels to the trade, right? So that's what this is. So we send their barrels to them. We've got contracts from it. So now we've got a nice revenue stream. And we get Diageo's marketing budget. As you can imagine, it's slightly larger than my marketing budget. And if you haven't figured out, you're looking at the Leopold Brothers marketing budget. This is it right here. We haven't had anybody in sales for 5 years now. We don't have a sales team. So this is our marketing budget. So for us, what we're hoping is this opens the door for more small distillers to work with Heaven Hill, to work with Jim Beam, to work with these other producers, and take individualized, quirky, interesting, local, regional flavors and blend it with larger producers to help bring the price point down, because it's expensive to make the 3-chamber still. As I mentioned, 2 barrels versus 100, obviously, it's very expensive to make it on a chamber still. But it also makes it much more widely available. So it's been a really, really fun partnership. And now you have 2 whiskeys. You have the collaboration that's column and rye, and then the 3-chamber on its own. Some people like one, some people like the other, some people like both. But we're very proud of it. It's been a lot of fun working on.
I'm in the both camp. They're both really interesting and good in different ways.
And you get to see how good of a blender Nicole is. Yeah, she asked, she said, so who's going to lead the blend? And I, of course, said, well, Nicole, how many tens of thousands of barrels do you have at Dickel to pick from? The most I've ever blended together is a whopping 4 barrels. So I told her to let the adult do the blend. And I think she just did a lovely job. She's very talented. Very talented.
Actually, that was a question I had for you for the 3-chamber, if you are actually blending them or are they single casks?
We are, I don't know if I would use the word blending. I call it mingling. So I will come across a barrel every now and again that I'm not happy with, and I'll skip and let it age longer. That's about the extent of the blending. One of the other things, and those of you familiar with the nose, Nancy Fraley, one of the industry's best blenders, she'll tell you that in her experience, now granted, we're an anomaly until it's been fun. We've been making whiskey for goodness, I guess 20 years now, really 15 in any meaningful amount. We've always put the whiskey down at that 50% ABV. And other younger distillers would make fun of me. They thought I was crazy for doing it. Now, of course, everybody's talking about low entry proof. So, but she will tell you that the lower entry proof tends to make whiskey that's more consistent from barrel to barrel. I can't give you a scientific explanation. But generally speaking, there's not a whole lot of difference in between the 3-chamber barrels. The one thing I have learned, and you're taught to do this, and particularly, when you're talking about single malts where the whiskey is sitting, when you pop that bung open, sitting for 15, 20 plus years, you can get stratification in it, right? So you're taught to pull that bung, drop your barrel thief in and stir. Holy cow, did we find that out for the 3-chamber rye. If you don't stir those barrels beforehand, it's layering in that thing. Again, those oils, the viscosity of it is so crazy thick. And of course, these things are relative. So it's still 50% alcohol, but yeah, we learned that you really, really have to stir that. But that lower entry proof makes it so that it's fairly consistent from barrel to barrel. To me, when I use the word blend when we're talking about some from one rick house, some from another, some that's 8, some that's 6, some that's 4, that's not what we're doing. But that's just me. Any other questions?
Is it possible to acquire this 8-year version yet? Where does one get a bottle of this? I have like 7 tabs open, but I can't quite find it.
We're, online on our online store. If we don't have any bottles, we will in the coming months. Yeah, we're really kind of holding on to the supply, as I mentioned, and really looking to release it at that 10-year mark.
It's fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, we're very proud of it. And of course, if you haven't figured this out, I mean, I was flying blind. I had to get my crazy brother. He's the one that's responsible for all this. He's the one who had to cut the check. So understand what a tightrope this was. I had to make a rye whiskey that was completely different, or what the hell's the point, right? If this tastes like the explanation I use, if bourbon and rye is 12 o'clock and this comes out at 12:01, I'm in trouble. But at the same time, if you go online, this is either the best whiskey in the history of the planet or the worst. And I knew that was, I knew that was going to come because it's a different, it's like the difference between cooking a steak on a grill and in a barbecue smoker. In my view, both can be delicious, but one really has nothing to do with the other. This really is an older style, an older way of making whiskey. The flavors are going to be different. The mouthfeel is going to be different. And it's just a question as to whether or not you like it. And I can tell you, sitting on the patio with my head maltster when we were looking to release it, we looked at each other and I said, well, this is going to go either one of two ways. Either there's no way this is going to be enough whiskey, or you and I are going to have one hell of a retirement because nobody's going to want this. There's no, you know, we were 2020 James Beard finalists, and a lot of folks would say that we make very good spirits, and I'm certainly proud of that. But everybody has different tastes. Everybody's gonna. I never know how folks are gonna react to it. I don't understand how you can taste the three chamber rye and not go crazy over it. But everybody has a different opinion, and their opinion isn't wrong, and that can be awful hard. Not only to take personally if you wind up reading too much of your clippings, and happily I don't have to worry about that because I've got an older brother that'll keep me in line. There's no having a big head at Leopold Brothers. Master distiller at our shop is used with air quotes, and it's usually after I do something stupid. So there is no having a big ego we're not saving the whales. But I'm very, very proud of what we do, and so is our crew. And it's just always delightful when folks do appreciate the time, the effort. Took us years to grow from that handful of seeds or the Abruzzi rye up to the volume. The whiskey would have been totally different if we used modern rye. We do our own floor maltings. Again, the whiskey would have been totally different if we would have bought that off of the shelf. And we think it's just a really, really wonderful representation of American whiskey in a place where I think there's an awful lot of wonderful producers. I still don't understand how the hell Wild Turkey 101 isn't on allocation. I will never understand that. I don't get it. It makes no freaking sense to me. That stuff is absolutely glorious. I wish I could make a whiskey that good, and yet, yeah. So I've given up on trying to understand the public a really long time ago. As long as we
And
can,
it's so reasonably priced.
yeah, that's the thing. I see now. Now you understand. Why would I try and make that? Because I can't. There's no way I can charge what they charge. I can't. The scale doesn't work. But I have so much respect for them and what they've done. You know, all the big distillers. I think Jim Beam is nice. I think Jack Daniels is nice. I think we've got a really beautiful whiskey tradition to be proud of. And the smaller distillers can just kind of play around with some of the gaps that they've left behind, I guess, is kind of the way at least I look at it. And most of the distillers I really like, and there's an awful lot of them out there doing cool stuff, I think, anyways, in America. Anyways, I digress. Should we move on to something else? Does everybody have all their questions answered?
Todd, quick question. I don't know if you went over this already. How many different stills do you already have? Do you have of the distillery? 'Cause, you know, three chamber. What else you got over there?
I have a lot of distillers who walk in and punch me in the arm. I've got eight different stills.
Wow.
We have a vodka column. We have two eau de vie stills. We have two Olemic stills that I use for the bourbon and the Maryland rye. The chamber still, a floor malting outfit. We've got fruit handling equipment. Last year, we did 180,000 pounds of peaches, Palisade peaches from Colorado, to make peach brandy, running it in the three chamber still. I'm no fool. So it really is a lot of folks kind of look at it as a playground. For those who haven't read about it, or anybody fan of rum here, we have a dunder pit in the back. We're using the concept behind dunder and applying it to whiskey production. We've been working on that for about 4 years now. Basically making high ester whiskey barrels that are intended for blending. Oh, you got the peach. Yeah. So the peach that you have, and it just hits hipsters in the dunder. Yeah, whenever people ask too many questions on tours, we just hit them over the head and throw them in the dunder pit. It's basically, well, we can't get away with what they can get away with in the Caribbean, where it's just a pit. What it is a pit that we put a cut up IBC tote in it. So if the health department shows up, they're not going to throw a hissy fit. But it allows us to do a butyric acid fermentation out back without making the whole place smell bad. But yeah, I'm a big believer in having the proper tools for the end goal that you're looking for. So again, eau de vie for that finesse in the lime. The alembics is what I use for the Maryland rye and the bourbon, where I'm looking to get big notes out of that, out of the fermented mash, as big as I can get. Yeah, I'm lucky, and my brother puts up with me, and Vendome obviously are big fans, all of them, but the alembic, but the eau de vie stills are from the good people at Vendome, who do just absolutely beautiful work. Oh, the pear. Yeah, that pear eau de vie. So that is a very traditional Bartlett. In Europe, it's called Williams pear, or you can buy shots of Willie, or at least that's what most bars called it that I hit in the 90s. Um, uh, it's just so oily, and again, the three chamber still is an oil extraction machine. When you're running pears, peaches, and apples, and it's overflowing in the spirit safe again where the hydrometer is bouncing, it looks like glycerin. It's so thick. And the brandies, that those eau de vies, we sold some of it as an eau de vie, which means unaged, just rested in glass for 6 months and then bottled. But the rest of it we've been putting down in number 4 char barrels. And the peach in particular, the way it's reacting with the number 4 char, it's about 2 years old. It's the best thing we've ever made. It's glorious.
Have you ever made quince
I
brandy?
did when I
Very
was in
recently, I
Oxford.
got to taste some, and it's very, very unique.
It is very unique. I got a chance to make it at a small farm distillery in Austria that I worked at for a bit, and I quite liked it. I quite liked the flavor.
Yeah.
I don't even know where the hell to get quince. California obviously is the answer to every question in America. But you have to remember I have an older brother. And when I start throwing out crazy stuff like that, he looks at me and he's like, "How the hell are we going to sell that?" And I'm like, "Okay, fair point." But so far we've done so apples, peaches, and pears is what we've done in the chamber still itself. We'll get to cherries. We have world-class Montmorency cherries, or the same variety as Black Forest cherries. So the same thing that's made, used to make Kirschwasser. And we use them now, but we turn it into a fruit cordial. But I haven't distilled it yet, and I don't know when we're going to do that. That's a tough one. We're in America. It's very tough to explain to an American why this little bottle is $50 and what the hell Kirschwasser is. So we have to be careful, because I have to keep the lights on as best as possible. So, any other questions? Move on to the next spirit. Just pick one, Vadim, whichever one, doesn't matter which one.
Oh, I think we're moving on to the 25th anniversary.
Oh, cool. So,
By the
this,
way, before we do that,
sure.
am I going crazy? I keep getting like there's a lime note on the finish. Is that actually on the finish of the three chamber, or am I still getting that from the lime cordial?
I think you might be getting that from the lime cordial.
Okay.
And I only say that because I've never had anybody tell me they tasted lime before.
That's why I was like, this doesn't make any sense. But
Yeah.
we just had lime cordial and we went to the 3 tier. It's like, okay, cool.
I
Glad we
do,
established
well, hold the phone here before, if you don't mind. There is a citrus component that you get from that bacterial fermentation that I mentioned, the lactic acid that produces lactic acid and acetic acid. The Maryland rye has an elevated amount. So again, more nerd. We opened the current building that we're in 2015 and started floor malting. We had a building before that for 7 years, 2 blocks away. Okay. So where you get your malt affects what your lactic acid bacteria loading is in your whiskey. So if you change where you get your malt, so if you're Springbank and you're malting it yourself, and let's say that they all of a sudden decide they're going to shut it down and start buying their malt from Port Ellen, I promise you in 20 years, their whiskey will taste different, because that bacteria is going to change the ppms of organic acid. And as you guys all know, the difference between a good whiskey and a great whiskey is a couple ppm one way or the other of the flavors of the aromas that you're trying to chase after, right? So we made Maryland rye at that old place, and then of course made it here. And I sent it in for GC because I was tasting citrus. I was starting to get a citrus note in the Maryland rye produced at the new plant. And there's a compound that you get that's a reaction with the acetic acid you get from that bacterial fermentation called octolacetate. And octolacetate tastes like orange marmalade. So you will get some citrus notes in some fruit whiskeys. That's a very, very, very common, but fairly common. And of course, all these things are synergistic. If everything else is shouting, you can't taste it, right? But it's in there. But we have about twice the octolacetate at our new plant, malting it ourselves than we did at the old plant when we were buying it. So anyways, just to address your lime comment.
That's awesome.
Nick, thank you for staying for so long. I apologize for running late for you today. And my goodness, you're right. It is midnight. Sorry about that. Come visit us. So the Fooder series, this is something we bought a mixing tank, a big oak tank from, we didn't buy it. They were good enough. They gave it to us. So this is a big 20-foot tall cedar tank, and it's, excuse me, European oak. Good Lord, where did I go with the cedar? That we got from New Belgium. New Belgium Brewing has a sour beer program, so they have what they call their Fooder forest. So they have about 40 of these tanks. And I asked them, hey, would you look to give one of them away for blending? And they said, or not give, sell it to us. And they said, we'll give it to you. Get it the hell out off of our floor. And so we brought that down. And what we do is we use that as a blending tank, basically, right? So it's lined with pitch. I don't know if you guys know what pitch is, but it's wax so that we're not picking up any wood flavor and we're not pissing off the TTB because now it's a different thing. It's a finish. It's not a finish. What I'm looking for is a little bit of oxygen from the top, because it's not filled all the way up to the top, and a little bit of time to marry the whiskeys. So what that is a blend of the 3-chamber and the Maryland rye. So now you've tasted each of them, and now you can see that Maryland rye, that nice fruit floral base, and it's being goosed with 3-chamber rye whiskey. So now we're playing around and using it in-house with our own whiskeys to blend something together. This was for our 25th anniversary. We released it. In October of last year. And this Rita, to answer your question, this I'm actually blending. So now I'm finally thinking like a blender. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Nancy Fraley. Of trying to find how much of the 3-chamber that we wanted to add to it to get some fun notes and to take it into a new direction that people will really dig. So to me, it's got enough of that hiccup of oiliness from the 3-chamber, but it still has that effervescent vibe from the Maryland style rye. And that's what the 25th anniversary is. So to me, it's again kind of taking the best attributes from 2 different whiskeys to make what I think is just a delicious dram. Really, really enjoy it.
Yeah, so interestingly for me, on the Maryland rye and the 3-chamber, I don't get any spice at all. I know this is slightly higher ABV, but there's a spice that's not just the ABV that comes through with the blend of those two, which is weird.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? So again, all of these things are here. It's one of the wonderful lessons from blending, and it's why Nicole would hassle me, because from before I really started looking into doing something like this, I thought like a brewer, right? It's also, this is part of my discussion at the keynote up in Canada. They think like blenders. I thought like a brewer, like a distiller. So in other words, I'm going to make you a delicious whiskey. I'm going to put it in a barrel. And for years, we just did singles because that's how my brain operated, right? It's like, here it is. It's finished. Hope you dig it. And as I was mentioning to Rita, what I wind up doing is just, more often than not, okay, I'm not happy with this. I'll skip over it. To me, I don't really feel like that's, blending per se. But this is, you just hit on a lovely point where it can lean into and emphasize something you can't taste in either whiskey by blending. It's crazy. And it's why, if you've had a chance, nice shirt, by the way. But looking at what you have on the back bar, you do a YouTube of Nancy Fraley, because she's just, first of all, she's so cool. She was in a freaking punk rock band, um, and was at the theology school at Harvard, right? So it's like, oh well, I've done nothing with my life. You're amazing, but she walks through all of these lovely surprises, because she goes from distillery to distillery, where sometimes she can, taste entire, lines of a particular whiskey and it's boring. But then when she blends the two together, huzzah, lavender jumps out, or the aforementioned orange marmalade jumps out. So as I was putting this together, it was a really wonderful exercise for me, because of how it would bring out these other flavors that I couldn't taste at all. And it's the same thing happened with the collaboration with Nicole, as a matter of fact, where I was getting notes in my own whiskey that were there, but I just hadn't noticed until Nicole started hitting it with the Dickel rye. It was just a fascinating adventure. And this is so intensely complex. It's crazy how complex the notion of blending is. And the notion of how two things can create a greater whole and highlight things that you don't really necessarily notice. I'm kind of rambling at this point, but I mean, it's a very astute point, and it really, working with Nicole, and bullshitting with Nancy Fraley, because she's just a pip to talk to. It's really changed the way I look at distilling, and it is really one of my favorite things. I thought I got the gray hair now. I'm 30 years in. I thought when I was in my 20s, by the time I got to this, I'd have it all figured out. Nope. Every day I walk in, and there's some sort of new surprise. And really, for the last 4 years, it's been a much greater understanding of blending, and how it can, and how, when it's done right, how cool it is. And on the other flip side, when it's mailed in, how it ruins the goddamn industry. I get really frustrated with non-distiller producers who make up some bullshit story, and they're not really blending, and not, it can be really frustrating for, I think I'm more projecting on that one. I'm frustrated for my fellow producers, small distillers, how hard it is to produce their stuff, stay independent, make enough money to keep the lights on, and then yet another NDP shows up and takes more of their sales. But at the same time, NDPs can be so cool, and do so many interesting things, and really elevate the entire industry. So it's a very complex subject, but suffice it to say, I completely agree, with the tasting note that you have, and it was a wonderful surprise. And this was actually, we have a gentleman who helps us part. He lives in California, Dave Driscoll. I don't know if any of you are familiar with him. He worked at K&L Wines out in California. I just love his writing. He wrote a blog, Jesus, 15 years ago, when nobody was paying attention to anything. And he just does some consulting work for us part-time, but he was the one who said this would be a fun thing. And so I got to give him a pretty big handshake as I'm playing around, and he got to see the different iterations for the 25th anniversary, of how many different directions you can take just two things. And of course, a lot of it is the three chamber rye is just so powerful. And to me, the Maryland rye is just such a fun, different whiskey to play with. And we're looking forward to more things. We've got a lot more coming from the Fooder series, and I'm playing around a little bit, poking around in the sourced market to look at some things that I normally wouldn't have looked at, because it's fun. I've really been enjoying looking at using my work as blending it with something else to try and take it in different directions, and also to do our level best to make things more affordable, which is really important to us. So,
How much of your the three chamber actually goes into this blend? Because you keep saying that it's such a powerful flavor.
oh God, I don't remember.
But I don't need an exact number, but is it like 10%
10,
or is it like
10,
50%?
10 to 20, I think.
Okay,
Honestly,
so not a lot.
I should be able to
But
rattle
it's
that
not like
off.
3 to 5. It's like
No, 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 no,
yeah.
no, no, sir. Oh no, I tried that. It sucked.
That's fair.
Once I started pushing the three chamber up, the whole glass kind of tasted like mud. Um,
Okay.
so, but I did it. I wanted to see, okay, well, what's this going to do? Is this going to be better? Is this going to be, because didn't start. All I knew is I want to take these two components and mix them together. I had no preconceived notions as to which I was going to do which.
Have you tried doing a bourbon through the three chambers still?
The bourbon that we've been making, I think the oldest barrel now is about 3 years. The other fun thing that we've been doing with that is malting corn, which is another lost art that disappeared. So we've been malting corn for it. It is spectacular. I think it's going to blow people's minds. I already warned my brother, the odds of me releasing it at 4 years at the way that it's maturing aren't very high. It's more than likely going to be 6 to 8 years. Sorry. We'll see how it goes.
Hey, release it when it's good, not when.
Yeah, we're very, very pleased with how the bourbon is coming along. Yeah, nobody does the malting corn, and let me tell you how fun. So the brewing diploma that I have from the German brewing school was half malting and half brewing. So technically, I'm an educated maltster, which is why I begged my brother to let us put in a malt house. There is next to no information, certainly zero technical information on how to malt corn, and there's certainly nobody's doing it on a floor. So I'm a bit of a the collaboration that we did with an ongoing collaboration that we do with New Belgium, where we're doing everything from using our malt to using our barrels. The series, if you can find the bottles, are hard to find. The whole series is called Adding Corners, which is New Belgium giving us, if it's okay to swear, giving us shit for doing things the hard way. Uh, um, and yeah, that we add corners, we don't, take them off, you know, but what it does is it gives us another lever to pull on. In other words, we can take the whiskey into directions it hasn't been in a very long time. And George Dickel, I learned, did use malted corn early on. Yeah, Frey Ranch, you got it. So Frey Ranch, Colby Frey, and his wife are wonderful, wonderful people. They're using drum maltings to make them. We are big fans. We swap bottles all the time. They're farmers. How do you not? I can't imagine doing all the crazy stuff that we do, and then by the way, Todd, it's harvest time. uh, so I have nothing but respect for them, and it just makes my heart soar to see how well they're doing, and how well received. Yeah, we've traded malted corn bottles, even though theirs is finished and ours is not. They're just wonderful, wonderful people, and I'm hoping people, if you haven't had their whiskeys, it's well worth the try in my opinion.
We're going to be featuring.
I have, and they are incredible,
Yeah,
incredibly good stuff.
they are lovely people. They really are. Again, if you haven't figured out, I'm a massive cheerleader for American whiskey. I'm very proud of being a when I was younger, I wanted to be the super cool guy making the best stuff. And of course, everybody likes to try and do that. But I got to tell you, the older I get, the more fun it is to just be on the rope pulling with people like the phrase, right? I just adore them. There was a time for a little bit so right around 2010, where there were a lot of quick buck artists that were trying to get into distilling, and they'd show up at our distillery unannounced and expect us to drop everything and tell them everything that and if you didn't, they'd get mad. And then there's the people like the phrase that are trying to build something, and I'd give them the shirt off of my back. You need help? What do you need? Happy to do it. And the folks that are truly trying to make things, and folks like Alan Bishop. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Alan Bishop. Was at Spirits at French Lick. and is opening up his new shop at Homestead in Indiana. If you have a chance, listen to any of his podcasts, any of his, not only is he a consummate historian, that man bleeds Indiana pride that I just absolutely adore. It's just watching people taking pride into the place. Place matters, I think. The people who make things matter. I'm a true believer. I'm a true humanist in that sense. And so it's just so cool when you run into people like the Frays and Alan Bishop who really want to make something and want to be a part of the industry and make things that are unique and distinctive. And yeah, money's important and you got to keep the lights on. I'm not downplaying that. Commerce is everything, or I wouldn't be talking to you guys right now. But it's really, really neat being a small part of this pretty awesome. Oh, Dave. I just he just had his 20th anniversary. Dave Smith, I'm sorry, from St. George. I'm reading the feed. We've been friends for forever. So the year that oh nice. Um, Dave the St. George crew, we were finalists for the James Beard Award for brewer, winemaker, distiller in 2020. So we kind of shared a Zoom call, but if you guys remember in 2020, the world had other problems. uh, so they got down to the final five. And so what they wound up doing is they shut down the whole James Beard Awards and didn't declare a winner. So St. George had been nominated. I think they were on their seventh nomination. We were on our third. And so Dave Smith and I like to brag that 2020 was the year we didn't lose the James Beard Award, close enough. And unfortunately, they killed the category. But anyways, I mean, case in point, St. George. I mean, those guys have been quietly making pear brandy, pioneers with that. Baller, making their malt whiskey, all their beautiful work, and they love what they do as much as I do. And my favorite thing about them, they came out with an absinthe. We came in 07. We came out like 6 months later. They came out with we came out with the aperitivo before they did. And they came just behind us. But what's so cool about it is you can see our personalities in these spirits. That one has nothing to do with the other, but we absolutely have the same mission of trying to make unique spirits and as Lance and Dave will both tell you, if you're going to release something, have something to say. And you get that vibe from the phrase, and it's why I like them so much. And I'm going to shut up now.
So Todd, speaking of American distillers, unfortunately, this is not a happy note, but it looks like Westward filed for bankruptcy. It looks like it's looking worse and worse the market is going down. Are you more worried about the distillers or are you more worried about the non-distilling producers? Because we are seeing casualties on kind of both ends.
Well, NDPs generally speaking, don't have as much capital at risk. So it's a lot easier to kind of keep your doors open. This is a relative thing. Obviously, everybody has a different financial picture. I happen to know Mr. Mooney. That was a bit of an unusual case in that they were with Distill Ventures, and that was Diageo funding for their marketing, and that got shut down. So they're restructuring. But generally speaking, yes, I am absolutely terrified for my fellow distillers. Out of the Denver area metro distilleries, I don't know anyone except for us that we were lucky that have laid people off. The three-tier system is a mess. The wholesalers are already hemorrhaging, and then you add in the tariff craziness where everybody's waiting to get some sort of a clear signal. COVID delayed a lot of closures, period, right? Where the government was cutting checks and rent abatement and all of that kind of stuff that delayed the natural closing of an awful lot of places. Restaurants still haven't recovered. So we're in a really, really precarious place where it wouldn't be all that hard to lose an awful lot of distillers and NDPs. I think part of the again, the NDPs are complicated, but the one easy way that I can say to kind of explain it, I'm sure all of us at some point, right? You get into whiskey, you get excited about it, you start to educate yourself on it, but you can't tell me that there wasn't a small twinge of disappointment as you found out that there is no Blanton's distillery, or there is no Pappy Van Winkle distillery, right? And that it's been made at several places. Now, that doesn't mean that whiskey isn't good. It doesn't mean that blending is bad. I'm not saying that, but NDPs, if they don't have a voice, a blending voice is what I'm trying to say. Again, going back to Wild Turkey, you have to give me one hell of a reason to buy your whiskey if it's an NDP, because I'd rather either drink my own, well, I mean, obviously, drink my own stuff, drink a friend's stuff, or have one of the major producers' stuff. I think that those bottles are going to be the first to go. And I hear it when I'm in the market all the time, where they're just, whether it's the store owners or actual customers who are like, why am I buying that if I know where it comes from and I can get it direct from the producer at 1/3 of the price? And I don't know what to say to that. So, but at the same time, I will tell you this: I am a technician. I know how to make spirits, and as I kind of alluded to at the start, I don't understand consumer behavior, and I never will. None of it makes any sense to me at all. I don't know how the hell we had a seltzer boom. I never, I started in beer. I would have never thought in a million years that brewers that I know would be making a seltzer to try and keep the lights on. Then you got the whole thing with Ozempic, right? Which I guess keeps people from drinking alcohol. And then you got Gen Z doesn't drink as much. And then you got COVID teaching a whole new generation to not go out, right? When I turned 21, I was at a bar more nights than I wasn't when I was in my early 20s. And we train the kids that turn 20 in 2020 and 2021. You don't necessarily have to do that. So there's just so much uncertainty right now. And the one thing I can tell you from working with all of these large producers, and again, I just got back from the Jim Beam. They do a conference every year at the University of Kentucky. So I got to hear the American perspective on whiskey anyways. And then I did the keynote up in Calgary with the Canadian distillers. Nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows what to do. Nobody knows if this is a blip. Nobody knows if this is, so it's just really uncharted waters. And then you throw in on top of everything else, tariffs, and it's just, yeah. It's enough to make you want to go take a nap. Any other questions? Did we get through all the spirits? Did I?
No, we're not.
No, not at all.
Oh my goodness. Okay, my apologies. What else do we got? Let's do it.
Let's try some of your bourbon. I mean, that's what we're on.
Oh, wonderful.
Old cask strength bourbon. And then for everyone else, we still have the 3-chamber peach liqueur.
Oh,
At which
okay.
point you have to explain to us the difference in a liqueur and a cordial.
Yep, happy to do that. Okay, so
before we move on, because I'm seeing people drop like flies.
I'm so sorry, guys.
No, absolutely. I'm loving this, and if they're not, they can catch the YouTube recap of this. Can I get everyone to join us on camera for just a second? We're gonna do our quick snap right now, just so we have that, because I am loving this. This is all. Whoa, Paul, that is a hefty beard. Holy crap, that's impressive. Jamie, not so much. Not as hefty of a beard, but all right, I'll take it. Tim, are you going to join us? Lucas? All right. Well, Todd, thank you so much for spending the evening with us. We're going to keep going. I just want to say thank you.
Of course.
And raise a glass to you and say cheers, and invite everyone to raise a glass and smile to the camera, because I'm going to do a quick screen grab. So give me 1 sec. Got it. Beautiful. So thank you so much for being here. This was fantastic. We're not done yet. but I wanted to make sure I get that out of the way so we can keep enjoying this. I mean, I've been texting my friends who are super nerdy in the background, and they're like, "Yeah, Todd gets nerdy," and love it. So we
Yeah,
are loving this. This is our type of presentation, so thank you.
I am. Yeah, the other lovely thing is you understand, you know, the bring up Dave Smith at St. George. We all marvel that anybody cares about what we do. This still feels new. The first 10 years, nobody cared. Nobody would listen. There was nobody to pitch. And so having people who, you know, are asking questions about what kind of sugar um, makes my heart sing, because if you haven't figured out, for us, the details is absolutely everything. So anyways, the 8-year-old bourbons, this is the opposite recipe. This is 65% corn, 15% rye, 20% malt, floor malt that we use. It is not malted. We have not released anything with the malted corn. I just wanted to make sure. This is pot distilled in an alembic still. We distill that twice. Into the barrel at 50%, as I mentioned. In our warehouse, we have a dunnage style warehouse. So we do this to get away from what the Freys have to deal with, or think the Garrison brothers, the lovely Garrison family in Texas, in that Texas heat, where the angel share can be double digits. We're in Colorado, you know, in August. It's not at all uncommon to never get out of, you know, any higher than 10 or 15% humidity in the daytime. It's very dry. So to ameliorate that, without doing, a lot of distillers that are in dry climates will use misters. They'll pump water into the air. If you've ever been on a patio where they do that, where they spray. Well, as I mentioned, my brother got his master's from Stanford in environmental engineering, where in Colorado, water is scarce. He said, "You're not doing that." Not that he needed to say that out loud. So what I decided to do was we designed a dunnage warehouse. So Scotland, I'm ripping off the Scots, but for a different reason. So if you can picture looking down at the top of the building, all the way around the building, we have native plants that the city has us put in. We don't have a choice. They have drip irrigation. So now we have water. And we have settled large gravel, medium gravel, fine gravel to get that moisture down into the earth. And now I'm going to flip to the top. And you can think about the barrels sitting on top of this. And on the inside of the building, it's earthen floors, just about 25 feet wide, with a concrete strip down the center, just like you'd see at Springbank. Or if you've seen Ichiro's malts, he uses the same system out in Japan. Earthen floors that you
Keep
lay.
throwing out these legendary distilleries like Springbank Churros, like Chichibu. Like, come on.
I've been around for a while. Ichiro was nice enough to come visit me because of the floor malting. So
That's awesome.
obviously,
That's fantastic.
he's doing his own thing there, and
Are you
making
gonna find a Colorado oak to marvel us with?
No, there's, you know, I there isn't anything that has grabbed my attention. We do have some peat bogs, but my wife doesn't like peat, so we figure that's as good a reason and not to pick what the hell we're going to distill. Plus, if we peat in the kiln, we can never get the phenols out, and then everything we make tastes like smoke, which may make like 5 of you really happy, and then the rest of you never buy our stuff again. But anyway, the dunnage style storage, the idea is we're trapping the humidity of the earth in it to try and get that angel share down to, you know, less than double digits. And now we just finished year 10, and the metrics on it, our evaporation rate is down to 4.3% per year, which is pretty similar to what you see in Kentucky. There's no power in the building. We're not using any energy. And obviously the difference between 4.3% per year and 10%, we've saved ourselves millions of dollars, obviously, through this very, very simple system. So it worked. And I actually got a nice handshake from my brother, which he doesn't give out very often. But anyways, so number 4 char for the bourbon, dunnage style warehouse, aged for at least 6 years. And then we decided to have some fun with it. We're finishing it in X3 chamber barrels. One of the reasons I did that, Yeah, one of these days. That's actually very much on the radar, by the by. Somebody else's peated whiskey. And if you haven't figured out, we work with Diageo, so that door is always open. We haven't discussed it. I want to be clear on that, but it's certainly a possibility. Anyway, we finish it in three chamber rye, and as I mentioned before, we do not turn our barrels upside down. So those finished three chamber rye barrels have an awful lot left in it. We're topping it off with the 6-year-old. I did it for several reasons. Those are some of my favorites. We just have to get them to return my phone calls. I'm sorry, you're who? No. But anyways, I did, we finished it in the three chamber rye barrels just to have a bit of fun. I thought it was cheeky because who the hell finishes a bourbon in a rye barrel? So a little kind of a wink and really dumb distiller's sense of humor, I guess, on that. But the idea is I'm trying to give you that silky finish. I'm trying to give you that depth on the nose, and again, take bourbon into some fun new places. So really, I mean, it kind of is all the same raw materials. We've got corn, we've got rye, we've got malt, and then putting it in a barrel that just had the rye and the malt. So to me, it's not really, if I had my way, I would just call it bourbon without the aged and three chamber rye things. At least not on the front label. I'd tell you on the back. We want to be transparent, but to me, I feel like this is still a bourbon. Just my opinion. I think a lot of people have strong opinions on finishes. Fred Minnick hates them. um, and it's hard not to adore that. He wants to protect the category. And there's more than a little merit to what he says, in my opinion, but I did this anyway. So um, I just think it's, again, we're trying to take bourbon in different directions. And boy, are we finding a really lovely fan base with this who are understanding, no, this is not Kentucky. And as I keep saying, hats off to them, but we're trying to take it in a um, completely different direction. The hazelnuts and the chestnuts, we do a small portion of the bourbon malted, and the malted portion, the small portion of the bourbon malted, kilned at higher temperatures. So there's 20% malt in it that I mentioned before. That's a distiller's malt. And then we take another, what we call whiskey malt. So fans of beer, Oktoberfest. So if you've ever had an Oktoberfest that's made with what's called Vienna malt, and not always, sometimes some Munich malt. Vienna malt is kilned in such a way that it has a nutty flavor to it that I just adore. I'm adding a small amount to the bourbon, so I'm very, very glad that you're picking up on the nuttiness that I just like. Um, Most of the barrels that we've been doing are right around 55%. So after 5 years, now we're starting to get up to the 8. The proof is finally starting to muscle up to that 55, 55.3 is the most common barrels that we're getting. I have no scientific explanation for why the proof stays the same for the first 4 or 5 years and then finally starts to evaporate more water when we hit year 8. Nicole Austin likes to joke and say it's because I'm a wizard. I am not a wizard. This was not intentional. I did not know that the proof was going to stay the same. I thought it was going to go up. What the hell do I know? Because obviously you got your barrel, your permeable membrane. How much water do you have in the air in Denver? Not much. So you think the water would leave faster, but it does. It just takes a few years for that to completely happen. And oh yes, Talnua. Again, the single malt from Aurora, excuse me. I'm thinking of a different place. I apologize. But anyways, I saw that pop up and I immediately thought of Talnua that does a triple distilled malt, and another husband and wife team, just as cool as the phrase are. Wonderful people. But anyways, any questions or comments on the bourbon? Yeah, I caught up. I get there. I'm not the smarter brother. Sorry, you're stuck with the not as smart one today. Does anybody have any questions or comments about the bourbon? I didn't realize there were so many people here. You're all quiet. Don't be. I'm here for questions. There are no bad comments. There are no, even if you don't like it, I'm down with that. What you got?
This is spectacular. This is a very tasty, nutty, complex bourbon. This is not just here's corn and wood and go fuck yourself. Like, this is great. I love this. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
What kind what the chart on the barrel that it's go to?
Number 4. Number 4. There's a few. We started to edge more into number 4. There's a few 3s in there as well. But the three chamber finish is all 4, 100%. But 3s and 4s when we're talking about the bourbon itself.
Any certain area where you're taking the oak? It's like a Missouri oak, or
It's independent stave across the board. If you saw 60 Minutes, them. They've been a wonderful, wonderful partner to us. We've been using them for 20 years. And they I don't know if you guys knew about the barrel shortage that hit about 5 years ago. And they could have, I'm sure, sold our barrels for twice of what we were paying, but they stuck with us. So we're going to be working with independent stave until we can't anymore.
I got
Jane?
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I got a really interesting spearmint note somewhere in the mid palate for this bourbon that morphed into that nuttiness. So it was almost like if you've ever made a mint syrup and you accidentally turned it into caramel.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
And threw some nuts in it, made praline. That's exactly what this tasted like to me. I'm like, this is a stunning, fantastic bourbon. I really like it.
Thank you. It again, hopefully different is good. We're trying to take these flavors into different directions, and I've been really, frankly, surprised and pleased at how much folks seem to enjoy it. Makes me happy.
I still like your rides better.
Jim, give me some time with the 3-chamber, bud. We'll see if we can bring you back. But that's a good thing. Again, that's a good thing.
I mean, I loved every one of the rides. The rides are incredible. The bourbon is nice. I like it, but I think the rides just soar. They're incredibly good.
Thank you, sir.
Fine, Jim. I'll keep the bourbon. You can have the rye.
Okay.
We can do some trading, I'm sure, here, folks.
I think the bourbon is a rye drinker's bourbon is really what it comes down to. It's got all those rye notes. It doesn't have all those bourbon notes that I am personally not a fan of. It's not overoaked. It doesn't taste like chewing cardboard. Like, it's not a classic bourbon that every every bourbon bro chases,
Yeah. So obviously I get the other end of this. Where they're expecting that and not getting it. The really nice thing is we've got some super Alan Laws down the road.
Mm-hmm.
He'll tell you he's making much more of that Kentucky style, and it's really fun when I kind of see a little bit of disappointment that I can send them. Go see Alan and their crew. They're doing beautiful stuff down at Laws, and to me, it just means we're spoiled to live in Colorado, that you can have these choices and have some local producers that are doing interesting things with whiskey and making things completely different, which I just think is really cool. None of the Colorado distillers have thing one to do with each other in terms of the way that we think about spirits or the way we produce. The only thing we have in common is that we really like each other. And that's about it, which I think is... Oh, Peach Street. Oh, for the win. Peach Street's OG. They've been around. We started distilling in 2001, but we didn't move to Colorado until 2008. So folks are really confused by us. Don't understand how long we've been around. So we were actually distilling just a wee bit before even Stranahan's was, but yeah, Pete Street, those are good people. If you're ever heading up I-70, their little tasting room bar is the busiest bar in Palisade, which is where all the peaches are grown, by the way. Shocking, Pete Street, you get the idea. But I think they make really great whiskeys, and they're just wonderful people. Any other questions or comments on the bourbon?
I saw Stephen and Rebecca. Go ahead.
Are the barrels toasted under that char?
I started getting into toasted with some of our later iterations, but toasting, I almost feel like an older distiller here and kind of cool. Toasting wasn't a thing. ISC didn't offer it when we got started. But yes, I have since added it. I like toasting because I absolutely hate with every fiber of my being the pencil shavings flavor that you can get from like a number two or a number. Yeah, they're still on my, I give them grief every time. They asked me to do 4 experimental barrels for them that were thinner staves. They're always playing around at independent stave. Well, I've got a 10-year-old bourbon that was used that used these thin staves, not toasted, and it's number 2. And I don't know when the hell I'm ever going to release that whiskey because the pencil shaving flavors won't go away. I'm sure some people might really, really like it, but I can't stand it. But from where I sit and the way I produce, the toasting snuffs that out. And I think it's the idea behind coming out with that toast, if you'll ask them, they'll tell you this, is to make it so that producers can release a no age statement, right? So 4 years or older as a blender that doesn't have that note. Now I identify it as pencil shavings, but some people like it, but that's what I finger as that. I think ISC uses different terminology for it, but yeah, that note is not for me. And so once they came out and, hey, do you want to play around with the toasted? And I tasted it after 2 years. I'm like, yeah, I'll keep using that. I dig it, but not what you're drinking right now. Great questions. Boy, you guys are bringing some heat with the questions today. This is good stuff. Anybody else on the bourbon? Not a one? Okay.
Questions on your single malt whenever that comes out. Are you using virgin American oak or are you reusing barrels from your rye and bourbon?
Yes.
Thank you. Perfect. Moving on.
So again, remember, I'm distilling on a 3-chamber still. If I was pot distilling, I wouldn't come anywhere close to new char.
Oh, okay.
In my opinion, it utterly defeats the purpose and snuffs out what makes the single malt sing. But so the bulk of what we're doing is used. It's our own cooperage, used rye, right? You get the idea. But we did do some that are new char because we're going to be using them as blenders. I don't think we'll ever sell the charred single malt on its own. That's not its intent. It's to help tame the big massive grain notes that you're getting from you're just pulling so much flavor out of the grain with the chamber still that I was realizing that I was putting barrels down. I wanted to have some more blending options with it. So
that makes sense.
that's just me. That's just my opinion.
No, that makes perfect sense. The other question I had was we were lucky enough to do a tasting with Laws, and on that tasting, and Jane and Amanda will correct me if I'm wrong, but we had a local Colorado maltster or farmer. They were growing local grain for Laws. Have you considered using any local grain for like a Colorado spin?
All of our grains comes from Colorado, every last pound of it. So the barley, as I mentioned, coarse. They've been the very famous Moravian strain of barley that they've acclimated to Colorado. The corn we're using comes from another maltster called Root Shoot that's down the road, and they grow the corn for us. The only reason the corn malts well that they're using, which is obviously important to us, which is not a characteristic anyone looks at. Well, the phrase "God love them," right? The rye, as I mentioned, is grown for us as well. All the grains that we use are in state. We're in a grain state, so we're lucky enough. We wouldn't do it if we couldn't get the quality that we were looking for. I don't believe in that nonsense. You don't grow corn in a freaking desert, and then not everything grows everywhere. I think it's And people can have a tendency to forget that, but we're very, very spoiled here in Colorado. We've got great farmers. Any other question? Any other questions on the bourbon, folks? And we can finish with the peach.
Oh, if you twist my arm, let's go peach.
All right. So again, as I mentioned, a little bit more research has led me to figure out that they were making peach brandies, particularly in Indiana. Actually, Alan Bishop sent me that particular nugget about distillers in Indiana using a chamber to make fruit brandies. I'm not in Europe. I'm hearing some accents here today, where I could get away with selling a whole lot of peach brandy. So I got to figure out a way to sell this to Americans. So the bulk of the peach brandy production that we did is sitting in barrels right now that we're going to release as bottled in bond for all the way to, I'm hoping, 15 years. We'll see. In the meantime, this pays for the peaches and makes a beautiful, beautiful cordial. So what this is, we take Palisade peaches, we de-stone them, we pull the stones out, we mash them whole. We have eau de vie fermenters that I built for me by Christian Karl out in Germany. An eau de vie fermenter, you can picture a very big, tall, skinny tank, and it has a very specifically shaped dished bottom with an impeller that's about 1 meter wide at the bottom. And the whole purpose to this tank is that when you ferment fruit and you leave the skins on and you're not making cider, the skins are still there. Pectins will start to react with the alcohol during fermentation. The pectins will separate, form a pectin cap. As big as this tank is, it might be 4 or 5 feet thick. Everybody who's worked with us for over a decade would quit. So we have to have this fermenter, and what it does is it folds the whole tank over. So if you open up the manway and look down in it, you can see the whole tank folding over. So that makes it so that the pectin doesn't have time to separate. We can ferment with the skins on. This is everything because the skins are where the aroma is. Doesn't matter what fruit you're talking about. That's where the bulk of the really nice top notes are. And if you separate it out, you're taking all the life of the spirit out of it. So we do, each fermenter holds about 60,000 pounds of peaches. We add some of the stones back in because the stones will give it, when you distill it, it gives it a marzipan vanilla notes to it that are really, really pleasant. If there's too much of the stone back in, it can be overwhelming and just a little bit too much like almonds, and that's not good in my view anyways. And then we take the whole thing, the whole mash, and we pump it over into the 3-chamber still and distill it. Again, it comes off around 65, 68, 7%, somewhere in there. And this is so rich in oil. The tradition, and this is left over from the French when we're talking about cognac, is to take your sweet ass time adding the water in. So it actually takes us to go from 65% alcohol off of the still down to 50. It takes us 2.5 months of adding water and stirring, because if you add it too quickly, you can get it to separate and saponify, which just wrecks the flavor, wrecks the aroma. It's just you've crashed the car basically. We take that distillate, and now so that this is eau de vie at this point. It's clear. It hasn't touched any oak. We put it into a stainless steel tank. We add Belgian candy sugar to it. Belgian candy sugar gives it a confectioner's note. Belgian candy sugar, if you don't know what that is, picture boiling cane sugar on your stove and adding a base to it to push the pH up to create reactions that create mired flavors. So baked good notes, confectioner's notes to it. So the color that you're seeing is coming from that Belgian candy sugar. It is 40% alcohol, so this is going to give you a bit of a bracing punch to it. I recommend it on the rocks. It's going to soften it immensely and really open up those peach flavors. You're going to get that oiliness that I mentioned. And to me, this is just great in iced tea if you don't like it on the rocks, or in a highball with soda water. We release this once a year. And as I mentioned, the peach brandy itself, it's coming up on 2 years now, and I'm over the moon happy about it. My favorite thing about peaches and pulling away from whiskey is that everybody knows what a peach tastes like. Everybody knows what an apple tastes like. So all the intimidation washes away. And now it's just a question of, do you dig it or like it or don't you? And that's the end of it. So this is a 3-chamber fruit brandy liqueur. Liqueur in a cordial in America, all that means is you've added at least 2.5% sugar to it. The young lady who asked me before about the sugar content in lime, just as a reminder, most cordials sold in America are 25 to 30% sugar, 25 grams per liter. This one is, I think, right around 18, something like that I added to it.
And what's the difference between a cordial and a peach liqueur?
Same thing, different word.
Got it.
Potato. Cordial, liqueur, schnapps, unfortunately, in America means liqueur. Yeah. So, yeah, but
This is dessert. That's all I can say.
that's exactly it.
It's what it is.
Yeah. Picture pouring that. My mom pours this on vanilla ice cream.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. And it's just a really, really fun thing to make. Any other comments? Steve, Rebecca, anybody? Bueller?
Is
I
the
think it's-
peach
sorry.
are ripe when you start the process, or not necessarily?
It's overripe.
Overripe.
So I had a bit of fun with the engineering of our plant. If you recall, we have a malting floor. So we shut down the malting. The steep tanks that we use to pump water in to hydrate the grains are the same tanks, the fermenters that I mentioned. So we shut down the malt floor, and we have 2 floors that are held at 55 degrees when we're malting, a little bit higher when we're ripening the fruit. So I get the fruit, we have a look and see where it is we're at, and we will ripen it on the malting floor, and also attemperate it, because as I mentioned before, I like to ferment cool. And we're talking about fruit brandies, I like to ferment in the 50s. So we will let that box warm up so that the ripening happens, and then cool that down to the fermentation temperature, and actually a little bit colder, because the fruit processing of going through that mill warms it up a little bit. So I'm taking that into account when we're setting the temperature of that malt floor. We're pumping it over, filling it up, adding the yeast to it, and off we go. I prefer late harvest peaches in Colorado. Angeles, I prefer. They're a bit more aromatic. Flavor doesn't matter when you're talking about, in my opinion, when you're talking about selecting fruit to make brandies. The flavor of it isn't, it shouldn't say that. It matters, but the aroma is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the aroma, because that's what's going to translate into the really nice top notes that you're getting on the nose. And to me, again, as I mentioned, it's leaning a lot more into peach preserves. If you've ever made jellies or jams, or that's where the aroma is that I'm looking for on this. Oh, pound cake. For the win, Amanda. Nice call. Yes, yes. Any other questions for me on the peach? Oh, we've got a poll.
Which fruit brandy is your favorite to make? Which one do you think really
Oh,
translates?
the peach. And the peach, because as I mentioned, it just, when I pulled a sample for our anniversary, and I think at the time it was rounding the corner to 2. And I'm in a barrel house, as I mentioned, the dunnage house, full of whiskey. So that's what you smell. When I popped open that bung and turned around to get the barrel thief to pull a sample, I could smell the peaches. And it's distillate sitting in a barrel
That's
that's
awesome.
4 feet away from my nose. So the brandy, I am over the moon excited to be able to release that in another 2 years. Or so. And Colorado, we've got world-class peaches here that nobody knows about. It's a bit of an agricultural anomaly. But we just have absolutely beautiful peaches. So we have quite a bit of Colorado pride with it.
Yeah, we know about them in Kansas. Let me tell you, when the peach trucks come through Kansas, we're lining up for those Palisades peaches.
Yeah, and we work with the Talbot family. The Talbot family, and of course they're like looking at me like I was from Mars when I first went up there to go see their plant, their processing plant. Oh goodness. I don't even know how many years. I'm not going to say. I'm going to sound old. But what they do is the first thing they do is it goes in a water bath, and the second thing it does is it hits an ozone bath. So understand, from my perspective as a distiller, huzzah! I don't want to make Calvados, or I'd like to do that one day, but anyways, I digress. What I want, so what they're doing is all the wild yeast and bacteria that's on the outside of that peach is killed. That's what I want because I'm trying to capture the essence of that peach as much as possible. I don't want to do a spontaneous fermentation for what I'm trying to do now. Whereas, Calvados, I was lucky enough to go visit my friend at Camus Distillery in Normandy. And that, spontaneous fermentation, because all of that yeast is around in his 100-plus-year-old apple orchard is a feature, not a flaw. With this, I want, in this case, one yeast strain doing the work and to make it as clean as possible. Good stuff. Are you guys noticing how the chamber still reacts with it and how the viscosity? Cool. Okay. It is super late. I apologize everybody for starting this late and keeping everybody up this late, but I very much appreciate the attention. And yes, Adam, we are 100% down with the amount of fruit. As I mentioned, we did I think 180,000 pounds of peaches. We did 120 of apple, 60 of pear. We've been having a lot of fun. We really have. And the young lady was asking about the health of the whiskey industry. I was in Zoom calls in 2021 speaking to folks like you all over the world, and a lot of the bars look like Stephen and Rebecca's. And I'm taking pictures of this with my brother saying this purchasing behavior can't last. It's just not possible. And it's going to contract at some point. So in 2021, we started pivoting to fruit. Again, trying to make things that other people, and we've got a chamber still. Folks don't have that. Let's make things that other folks can't. We're still obviously full speed ahead with our whiskey, but we really enjoy working with the fruit. It's a fun day. They're very long days to fill those fermenters. But it's an awful lot of fun, and we learn so much from every single harvest. But I'm glad you got a chance to try the peach liqueur. I think it's a fun thing. These are things that we were drinking an awful long time ago, and it's fun to bring them back.
Well, and one of the things we didn't try tonight, I mean, I'm a big fan of Leopold, and being in Kansas, we're not that horribly far away, but one of the things we didn't try tonight that I would definitely encourage people to try is your gins. Your gins are, especially the summer gin, they're amazing.
Yeah, we no, we have not released the Apple stuff. We've got another 3+ years on that. Thank you for asking, Adam. We distill each one of the botanicals separately. This is a little, there's been a few people that call it the Leopold method, but I think fractional distillation is a little bit more accurate. I'm sure we weren't the first people to do this. But allows you to make cuts when you're distilling all the botanicals together. Juniper doesn't have the same boiling point as the coriander or the orris or the immortal flower or the cardamom. And by distilling each one of them, I can change the proof in the still. I can change where the cuts are. And for the juniper in particular, if you distill it on its own, I make the cut much earlier than everybody else would. And so it makes it so it tastes like a berry. When you run the juniper longer, because you've got all those botanicals together and you're trying to find a happy medium, you're overboiling the juniper. And the longer you run that, the more that you extract a compound called pinene, which shockingly tastes like pine needles. And everybody I know that can't stand gin say it tastes like a Christmas tree, get it out of my mouth. We still have that juniper character, but it's a different modality because I'm not capturing the same compounds that every other distiller is. And so we have a lot of, we do very well with our gins, and thank you very, very much for noticing. They're a lot of fun to make. And to me, a gin and tonic is hot summer day. There aren't too many things. I don't have any gin at my house. for very good reason, especially the summer gin. Just a real quick story. We were moving into our house and finally got to, after how many years of owning business, I bought a house with my wife about 4 or 5 years ago, I guess now. And I was unpacking a bunch of dishes and thinking to myself, Jesus, everybody, I was just there alone. Everybody says how stressful moving is. I'm not stressed at all. And then I looked over at the summer gin bottle and it was half gone. And I'm like, oh, all right. I shouldn't be bringing the summer gin, huh? It just goes down too easily. That's the other issue with it because of the cuts that I make it, it makes it incredibly clean. The longer you run into that tails, the more um, of the pithy flavor that you can get. It's not pith, it's tannins that are coming out of the botanical over time. Um, but this made a hell of a lot more sense in 2001 when we released Leopold's gin. So if you come on a tour, you'll see all of these various different size stainless steel tanks everywhere. My brother gets mad at me every time he walks by it, as opposed to everybody else that has one tank with everything in it. We've got all these smaller tanks because we distill them all separately and then blend them together for every different batch. So it's very time consuming, but I think it's worth it. And again, it made more sense when we were doing pails, not tanks of our of our gin. So anyway, I digress. Does anybody else have any more questions before I get out of here?
I was actually going to ask if you have anything really interesting and fabulous that you're working on that you haven't told us about.
Great question. First of all, 10-year-old Maryland rye that will be released this late fall, winter. I've mentioned the fruit brandies. It's going to be a while before we drop that in. I mentioned the bourbon. I mentioned the single malt. We have some other fun cordials. So this is a nice way to finish the night, I think. The peach that you just had, the stones that I talked about, I don't know if folks are familiar with amaretto. Amaretto was made traditionally with apricot pits. You take the apricot pits, you soak alcohol in it, it extracts that almondy marzipan flavor out of it. So we've got about 2,000 pounds of peach stones that have been soaking for over a year, and we're going to bottle an amaretto that is just it's delicious. I'm really happy with it. In the winter time when it's a little bit colder and an amaretto sour sounds nice. And honestly, I kind of through all the questions tonight, let all the cats out of the bag, I think, in terms of what we have going on. So, but great question, Jane. Thank you.
What flavor profiles? Because we didn't get to try them. You've got two aperitivos and a Fernet.
Yeah.
What flavor profiles are you most closely to if someone's trying to figure out?
Oh shit. Well, the Fernet is discontinued. We're done with
Okay.
that for a while. We'll come out with some more. That was America's first Fernet. The Aperitivo Classico, we color that with cochineal. Shorthand for that, I would say it's between Campari and Aperol in terms of bitterness. The aromas on that are distilled grapefruit, coriander, and genepi. So it's a really nice mix. And my battery might crap out in the middle of this conversation here as we're ending it, just FYI. And then the new one that we came out with, Aperitivo Bianco, it's actually distilled marigolds. It's an unbelievably light floral. It jumps out of the glass. It makes a white Negroni or a, top it with champagne or soda water that it jumps out of the glass. That's the Aperitivo Bianco.
Cool.
I'm so delighted with how that came out. I've been distilling marigolds for years. Finally figured out a place. It's marigolds. Young lady who mentioned chamomile, distilled chamomile, and roses. So it's floral, but it's got that nice hiccup of bitterness from the gentian root. It just makes beautiful Negronis.
That sounds awesome.
It's good stuff. Any other questions, folks? And again, if I pop out, I'm getting the low battery and I'm nowhere near my plug.
Can I ask a question that's not directly related to this group?
Go ahead.
So my husband and I are part of another group, and we are looking to make a trip out to Colorado. And we were looking at visiting like one or two distilleries and really spending a lot of time there. And Leopold's was one of them that my husband and I recommended. And we were wondering if there's somebody we could contact who would be a contact point for that.
Me.
Okay.
Distiller at leopoldbros.com. We are not, my mom does books twice a week. And there are 5 folks in production. Alex handles the tasting room. He's our education specialist. But I'm happy to lead you through anything that you need to do. Happy to do it. Happy to help you get another distillery on board too.
Oh, let's talk about that. Thank you, Todd. Appreciate it.
We all know each other. It's an easy phone call, and it'll be an awful lot of fun for you guys we've got some great shops out here doing some cool stuff.
Awesome. You want to know what the winner was for tonight as far as whiskeys go?
What do we got?
What do you think? Who do you think took the night?
Well, I mean, I always throw out the 3-chamber, but I got to tell you, I've been really impressed with this group. So I can see you guys going off book. I honestly don't know.
All right. Well, you got to pick one.
3-chamber.
3-chamber it is. You were 100% right in your whole evaluation.
I mean, truly, guys, it was really a lot of fun. You guys this is a seriously educated crew. I can't remember the last time we had a crew like this.
Thank you. We've been spoiled for sure.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like it, but I really appreciate y'all taking the time. I want to apologize again for the futz with the internet again. I've been sitting here terrified that it was going to cut out on me at any time, and I'm just delighted it didn't. But really,
thank you, Todd. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much for your time. You know where to find us. Distiller at leopoldbros.com. If I missed any questions that anybody has, I answer my emails. So happy to take care of you. And yeah, take care, guys.
Love it. Thank you so much. Have a great night.